Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Indaba Africa. Today's a special feature on land and poverty in South Africa. It's a discussion about land tenure, land rights, expropriation without compensation, the impact of land on reforming economies around the world, and how that has led to greater prosperity in countries that have successfully done it. Also, the issue of the unresolved question of land tenure in many parts of Africa, which remain on the table. So welcome to the stream today, folks. Let's see who we've got here. Is anybody signed in, or am I lonesome today? Let's see what's going on. So, we've got a couple of folks. There's HBM Air, the Right Reverend Rawhide. Good to see you guys. Right, so let me ask those who are present in the chat, did folks do their homework? I did, in the setup for this, ask folks to reach out and take a look at that article for me and see. Excuse me just a moment. Somebody sent me a letter asking me something here. This is strange. Okay, that's odd. I must have finally got a response to something I applied for a long time ago. Anyway, Right Reverend Rawhide says, how many rugby shirts do you own? Somewhere in the order of about 70 rugby shirts. Rudy is knocking. Rudy, if you're knocking in the stream already to get in Zoom, just be patient. I'm not bringing anybody in yet. Okay, I'll bring folks in here shortly into the stream. I just want to get this started. So let's go ahead and talk about issues here of the day, land and poverty. So for those of you paying attention to, hang on a second here. I've got to add this in, I think. Just a moment. I thought I had added something in here, so I need a window capture. Okay, and what I'm going to do is add in a different source here. And I thought it was here, so that's not it. Where's it at? There we go. That's the one. All right, so there you go. So this is the article that I'm referring to from April 7th of 2018, Land and Poverty in South Africa, an article which I published on LinkedIn, and it talks about the issues of land and poverty and dispenses with a few myths. So I'll read the first paragraph there, and then I'll just go quickly through the summary. Hopefully folks have read it. So this is not simply complaining or whinging about land in South Africa. It's actually talking about potential solutions to resolve the issue. All right, good. Hendo says he promoted this on the live stream and Facebook groups. Well, thanks a lot. Hopefully some folks will be tuning in. So for two and a half decades after the end of apartheid and South Africa's first universal democratic elections, millions of South Africans, mostly black, live in poverty, many surviving solely on public assistance in the form of grants. The argument which some advance is that the current situation is a result of several factors, chiefly something called white monopoly capital, white farmland tenure, black dispossession, racism, individual, institutional, and collusion between the ruling African National Congress and corporate interest. Well, I'm going to finish this last paragraph. Poverty in South Africa has many causes, not the least of which is the enduring legacy of dispossession and inequity stemming from racist policies of the apartheid era. However, the popular narrative advanced by Julius Malema and his economic freedom fighters, and by many in the ruling African National Congress, is inaccurate, dishonest, and misleading. Rather than devote time to debunk those arguments, which warrants a paper of its own, I'll offer a few suggestions that would reduce poverty and improve the standard of living for all South Africans. And with that, folks, what we're talking about here is the first is I mentioned establishing a national sovereign wealth fund. Now, the government of Cyril Ramaphosa has supposedly established a national sovereign wealth fund, but it is a sad joke. It is not a serious attempt, and it is 26 years too late. Nonetheless, it is not entirely too late to establish a national sovereign wealth fund in which money goes into a fund managed by a third party, not the government of South Africa, that manages wealth creation for all South Africans. And payments out of that would be to people based on need. Not based on skin color, but based on need. So if you're a poor white South African living in a squatter camp outside Pretoria, you could qualify to receive a payout from the National Sovereign Wealth Fund. If you're a poor black mother living alone in the Transkei, you could get yourself a payment from this. Second is to reform, resource, and redeploy the South African Police Service. South African Police Service is very inefficient at what it does, doesn't have enough police officers on the beat in any given hour of the day, and does not do its primary job, which is ensure public safety. It's ineffective at that role. So they need to improve forensic capabilities, increase the number of patrolmen and detectives to meet existing needs, not to mention this issue of rural security. Third, reform public education. Education in South Africa is a sick, twisted joke. In many respects, it's far worse than the Bantu education system that existed for most black South Africans. Number four, eliminate corruption and corrupt practices in government, and I'm talking about the actual theft of state funds and the diversion of contracts to cronies and cadres. Oh, look at that. There's the Guptas with our boy Jay-Z. implement genuine land reforms, not window dressing. So land is a really sensitive issue in South Africa, but what has been happening is window dressing, not serious reform. Right. And so there you go. After that, I break down and talk about addressing land for the benefit of all South Africans, not something on race-based revenge or vengeance. And these are the questions. All right, so this is a 9-page paper when it prints out, but it's not really as bad as that. There's a lot of photos and graphs in this. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to talk about that. There we go. All right, so I'm going to get started on the Zoom call here in just a moment. A little house rules up front, okay? I'm going to bring in 1 or 2 people, probably 2 at a time max. So be patient in the waiting room, and I'll keep them on for a little bit. It's an effort to discuss the issue cogently and intellectually. If you have personal experiences that are tragic, you're welcome to share them if you'd like, but I don't want to turn this into a whinging or moaning session. I want it to be productive. Also, folks, I asked that if you're drinking alcohol, please set it aside while you're on the phone, just for that little bit of time. I'd appreciate that. I had to go back last night and reset my video to make sure the minors couldn't see it. Got a little chippy in the Zoom session last night. So anyway, please don't do that. You're welcome to smoke. Smoke if you got them. But please, no drinking. And please try to keep profanity to a minimum, so we can make sure lots of people can see this stream after the fact. So we have about a third the normal size audience tuning in right now. I don't know if that's because people are at work or what's going on, or maybe land didn't really get a lot of people jazzed up. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is start the Zoom session here in just a moment. Let me put my earpieces in so I can actually hear. Turn the volume up a little bit. All right, and so what I'm going to do now is look and see if anybody is in. Okay. Oh, nobody's there because I haven't given you the link. Sorry about that. That would be the host fault. All right, so I've got the link here, and you should be able to just click on this and get in. Right, there you go. All right, so if we get some folks to try to call in, you can put your camera on if you want, or you can leave it off and just be video only, or audio only if you prefer. That's your choice. So just go ahead, and anyone that wants to call in can do that now. In the meantime, this article that I wrote was intended to get people to discuss the issue of land and poverty in South Africa. And I did it because of the distortion in the politics that were going on with the African National Congress, but specifically the economic freedom fighters misleading people about the situation in South Africa. Really disturbing from my perspective. And so I spent a lot of time. All right, my Zoom has crashed. Where's Zoom at? That's not good. Okay. What the heck? All right. Okay. That was weird. All right, folks. Sorry about that. It looks like my Zoom window crashed for a moment. It's back now. Hopefully you can see me again. You can hear me. Yeah. What memory issue? You mean with the EFF? Could be a memory issue. That's correct. All right, so let me get the link in here again. Make sure I got the correct link. Copy link. Here we go. Back into the chat session for folks. Okay, paste. There you go. No, it's the red ants. There you go. All right, so there is the link, and I'll get the code, although you don't need the code, but just to be sure, 421-818. 421-421-818. All right, so that's the link, ladies and gentlemen, and you can call into Zoom session if you'd like. There you go. Yeah, those red ants. That was odd. I was able to resume the meeting, though, so that's good news. So folks should be able to get in. Right. Okay. So, yeah, the purpose of the article was because I was getting tired of listening to the economic freedom fighters and the ANC distort the political arguments about land in South Africa. First off, for historical reference, the deal was that people agreed that back in 1994, after the CODESA, the Convention for Democratic South Africa, the deal there, which led to the end of apartheid, was that land would only be considered for redistribution and for let's draw a blank here. Land could only be considered for return to folks back to the year 1910. Now, why 1910? 1910 is a very good date to pick because prior to 1910, there was never any country of South Africa as such. Prior to 1910, South Africa was a collection of the Cape Colony, the Natal Colony, the Zulu Kingdom, the Basotho, the Tswana, Trek Boers, who formed their own states, so the Orange Free State, and the Transvaal, and briefly Natalia, and yet another small Trek Boer state. So it was never a country as such. It wasn't until the Union of South Africa Act by the British Parliament in 1910, after the Boer War, the Second Boer War, that their country of South Africa actually existed. So what was agreed was that people could not claim land prior to 1910. Now, why does this matter? Because it's actually a very good idea, because it makes a lot of sense. Can I bump up the sound? Okay. Well, the sound is up pretty high, and I don't understand why you can't hear it, because I'm into the red in the mic. So I'll turn the mic up a little bit later. Okay. Okay. I really think that people are just pulling me and having a crack at me on this sound thing when everybody else can hear it perfectly fine. Right. Okay. So 1910 was the date chosen, and the reason for picking 1910, looking for the link. Why are people looking for the link? It's right there in the chat, right above where you said looking for the link. I'm confused. That's the link. Okay. There you go. But nobody's calling in. So anyway, back to that. Just me in the session so far. Right. Yeah, so it became one country in 1910. And so the pragmatic agreement was that anything before 1910 would be considered the sands of history. Things that happened as a result of the Bantu migrating south along the Rift Valley down into southern Africa. And on top of that, the Europeans later arriving in the Western Cape and then expanding eastwards and then northwards into what is today South Africa and deeper parts of Africa. So 1910 made a lot of sense. Also, 1910, that meant from 1995 back to 1910 that it's possible for people to have been alive to have been dispossessed and have their land taken from them. Prior to that, there would be no living human who could have had their land dispossessed. So if you're going to return land to those who've been defrauded or cheated out of their land or taken from them, then that's a reasonable point of time. You could actually make compensation to people, either in the form of the land, other land, or monetary compensation to let them get something back for what happened. And that was an important date. So here's the thing. The first round of land reform took place from 95 to 99, 5 years. About 75,000 land claims were submitted. Many of them were urban claims in the cities like District 6 in Cape Town, places like that, where people were claiming land from urban centers or on the fringes of it where the cities had expanded. There were farm claims, and those were the more difficult to resolve. Nonetheless, many of these claims, over 73,000 of those land claims were resolved within a decade of them being filed. A small number of them still remain in contention, and a few have been court cases since then. Beyond that, what has happened with land is that under Zuma's government, they reopened the land issue and another 140,000 plus land claims came in. The problem is that many of these claims are fraudulent or invalid. They do not meet the standard for claiming land. But what has happened since then is the economic freedom fighters have risen up to become a minor and irritating party for everyone in politics in South Africa except themselves. And they've raised the issue of land. And of course, they want to nationalize everything and take everything away from anybody. Private property ownership is no good. It only can be in the hands of Floyd Shivumbu, his brother, and Julius Malema. Everyone else can just do without. So the economic freedom fighters raised this issue. The African National Congress, terrified that they were losing support to the ANC, which they were. If you notice, the EFF picked up votes in each successive election, although they seem to have plateaued now. Those votes came entirely from the African National Congress, not from other parties for the most part. So fearing that they would lose support to the EFF, suddenly the African National Congress changed direction. They tacked in a different direction and suddenly were in favor of expropriation without compensation. Now, I should mention this, that the expropriation without compensation is something that only got through Parliament on a passing vote after it had been raised year after year after year in the Parliament by parliamentarians, and the African National Congress itself had overwhelmingly voted against such a measure year after year after year because the party told them to do it. That's why the parliamentarians had voted against it. But the real reason the party was against it is because they realized that it would destroy value in the economy and South Africa would go down the tubes. They only started supporting it when they saw their popularity waning and they needed something. Also, I would say that you notice that the expropriation without compensation process has been extremely slow. We've been talking about this now since 2016. It's 2020, and it has not happened yet. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. What I'm saying is that there's a reason why the ANC was slow, and my argument was that they did this almost entirely for the sake of the 2019 election so they wouldn't lose power, and it worked. They didn't lose power in 2019. They remain in power. It's difficult to assess where the true ideas and intent of the African National Congress are with regard to expropriation without compensation at this stage, because this party is on the ropes once again, but not because of land and poverty, but because of their own actions with the National Coronavirus Command Council. And they've really irritated tens of millions of South Africans, and they find themselves on the defensive as a consequence. So expropriation without compensation does come up again. And we should make it clear for folks, let's see if anybody's called in yet. Nope, just me there. All right, so I should make it clear for folks that expropriation without compensation is the order or the discussion we're having with regards to amending the Constitution. But within South Africa's Constitution from 1997, the Constitution already allows the government to take your property. It can indeed take your property in South Africa. Now, we have a similar situation here in the United States. It's called eminent domain, where the state can take your property, your land, in the public interest. So, for instance, in the 19th century, when we built railroads, someone had a farm, the government would expropriate their property, and it's called eminent domain. The government has that right to take it, at least under our political system. But they must compensate you fairly, and that becomes the issue. In South Africa, you have this similar thing with expropriation with compensation, and you must compensate someone fairly. But ladies and gentlemen, this is not simply about land, it's about poverty as well. And the issue about poverty is when you undermine the financial system, when you undermine land tenure and land rights, you eviscerate and destroy credit markets, you destroy consumer confidence, and you destroy foreign direct investor confidence, and any investor for that matter. So what happens is you have a disaster on your hands. And that's what we're talking about here. Right, so nobody's calling in. Let me just go ahead and say hello to everybody who's here. I get a little drink very quickly because I was out in the sun before I came in. So HBM Air is here, and the Right Reverend Air. Nigel, good to see you guys. Rudy. Hendo, Acid Zill. Chimpanzee DNA on the testing vaccine for COVID-19. The South African government has injected people so far. Oh, good God. Tertia, good to see you there. Lezan, hello. Oh, yes, I am wearing a Sharks jersey. And Hendo promoted this. Babe Brew, Chris, sound a bit soft. Okay, I've turned it up, and I haven't heard anybody complain about it since then, so hopefully it's done the trick. Cool, let's see what these idiots are up to now. Hey, Gareth. Wesley, afternoon. Hendo, Pinar, von Vijk. They got Jelaine, rip, okay. ANC copying the CCP in USSR. Best shirt. Yeah, Gareth likes the Sharks jersey. Yep, there's the link. Drian, good to see you. Superman 2050. Have we seen you before? Okay. Ramaphosa is as bad as Trump. Well, Trump's not bad, so I disagree with you. Trump is actually effective. America was on a glide path, a trajectory to great prosperity and global influence once again after the disastrous, abysmal years of Barack Hussein Obama. We were on the right path again, despite Orange Man Bad having some personal foibles and annoying a lot of people and spouting off whatever was on his mind. Nonetheless, we were on a great path. Unemployment was at record lows in all demographics in this country. Prosperity had returned to this country. GDP growth was on a great glide path, averaging over 3% per year. Debt was the main issue remaining, and national security. And then getting ourselves entangled in foreign affairs. Those were the issues being dealt with. Trump has done quite well on those issues. So I'm not really sure what you mean Ramaphosa is as bad as Trump. Ramaphosa has done nothing except racialize the entire country of South Africa with every issue possible, including blaming domestic violence, spousal abuse on white people. What? Excuse me? What planet is he on? Yeah, so I'm not so sure how Ramaphosa is as bad as Trump. Ramaphosa was handed over $400 million. He turned $400 million into $450 million. Woohoo! Donald Trump was handed $5 million as a young man and turned it into $10 billion. Yeah, same timeline, by the way. Okay, so Nigel, anyone see the headlines for China? All gold does not glitter. Yeah, I noticed that my Zoom keeps zapping up and down there, folks. Not sure what that's all about. No, it's not RAM, not RAM. I checked my RAM before I did this by going into my control panel and shutting down apps to make sure. I've got 32 gigs of RAM on this PC. It's not a problem. It's the red ants. Okay. Okay, Hendo said he was hearing fine, yeah. But anyway. All right, Gareth. Okay. Yeah, I always get a kick out of that. Why do people turn to the host and say, hey, can you turn your sound up? Ladies and gentlemen, okay, I'm speaking into a microphone over a USB cable into a motherboard on a PC. It's converted into information, and it goes out over a LAN cable into a cable network system in America to a router locally, split and parse the data going around the world to multiple locations simultaneously. When my sound is too low and I'm on the road, listening on my mobile or listening to my computer, my first reaction is to check my volume to see if I can turn it up. But people always say, can you turn your volume up? Yes, I know people probably looked at their volume, but I just it's entertaining. I'm just saying it's funny. Let's see what else. Pinar. Hendo was born in District 6. Are you serious? That's cool. That is cool. All right, good afternoon. Oops. Catch up here. Leonie Boyson says, good afternoon, Chris. The 8's interesting as as most blacks and some whites don't know the history of you tell a lie over and over and it becomes truth. That's true. Well, it's the same thing happening here in America now. They're putting KKK, they're painting KKK on the statue of a man who devoted his entire life and all of his personal income and his wealth to freeing black slaves from the South, smuggling them through the Underground Railroad up to Philadelphia, and then providing lodging and teaching them as a teacher, educating them so they became literate, and then helping them find work afterwards. This man's statue in central Philadelphia was demonized, terrorized, attacked, spray painted on, and damaged by these thugs. They don't care about history. History doesn't matter to them. History is their navel, and that's what they're looking at. So that's what's going on. All right. Reverend says when he sorts out. Let me see if anybody's called in and I've missed it yet. Okay, I got Nigel here. Okay, there's Nigel. Okay, let me put my earpiece on since I'm going to need that to talk to Nigel. I got 2 links for Nigel trying to come in now. Did you try to come in twice? I'll just say admit all. Okay. All right, Nigel's joining, so hopefully we'll get Nigel in here in just a second. People loving the Sharks jersey. That's right. All right, in the UK, you only get social assistance for the first generation of children. Yeah, that's how it should be. Or 2 children. Gotcha. With no Trump, you'd have Hillary. You guys made an excellent choice. Thank you, Gareth. Nigel, yes, you're getting a please wait because I didn't see that you were calling in, so I was checking the chat. Yeah, I only got 2 eyes, and for some reason you're not joining now, Nigel. I've accepted you. Anyway, maybe cancel and try again. I've got the window up so I can see people trying to get in now. Pinar says 1/3 of the population was white in the 1930s. 20% of South Africa was white, European, when the country first did its first census, which was in 1911. 20%. 1 in 5 people in South Africa was white in 1911. Petrus says, just scrolled over the news. South Africa's a mask. Erica's here. Hi, Erica. Nigel's knocking. Not anymore. He stopped. Okay. Leonie Boyson says, sound not very good, very soft from my side. Well, the problem with that, Leonie, is that 9 people just said they can hear fine, so it must be the volume on your side. And before I start messing the stream up for everybody, I apologize. Ooh, Corley Vandermeer put a shark in there. All right, folks, I'm going to put the link in again, give people a chance to call in one more time. The idea was to talk. I can talk all day about land and poverty, so I'll do that if you guys like. But anyway, there's the link once again for folks who want to try to call in and be part of the conversation. If you have personal experiences when it comes to land, or you have personal experiences. So one of the things that's not known about this, for instance, is that people forget that in the 1980s, now I'm not trying to diminish what happened, but 2.5 million people as late as the 1980s were being dislocated, relocated from where they lived. Many people lived there for generations, if not hundreds of years, to other parts of South Africa as part of the Bantustan, the creation of these independent republics, this fiction that took place under the National Party with the Transkei, the Ciskei, Bophuthatswana, and these other places. So what happened is, Nigel's trying to get in now. Okay, got him back. Okay, admit Nigel. All right, so when they did that, they moved 2.5 million South Africans. Now, almost all of them were black, but folks, some of them were actually also white South Africans who were relocated from their property and had land. So, for instance, some white farmers in Northwest, in the area below Madikwe and around Pilanesberg, had land taken from them to help create Bophuthatswana. So Bophuthatswana was created, and they were relocated to Natal. So land restitution affects all South Africans, not simply black South Africans, and that's a misnomer people seem to think. Overwhelmingly black South Africans and colored South Africans are affected by land redistribution, but it's not solely an issue for them. Nigel, welcome in. Good to see you made it.
Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing okay now that I don't know what happened there with the Zoom session. It just like crashed. I looked up and like my mouth is half open. I'm like, so I had to close it and just reopen it. The good news is that the link was still good. Keith is trying to come in. Okay, I'm going to take 2 people at a time in the conversation, and that way we keep it manageable. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to bring Keith in, so it'll be 3 of us in the conversation, and then once folks get to have their say and add their contributions, then I'll let someone else in. And if no one else tries to join, then you guys get to stay forever. There's Keith. So, and Keith looks like, can you turn your volume down, Keith? I'm getting a reverb from my voice. There you go.
There you go.
Okay, brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've noticed one thing. Now, I'll leave myself out of this, but with the Pete Retief beard, I almost qualify. But I was going to say, this looks like an old white guy's conversation only. All right, Nigel, Nigel, you came in first. Any points you'd like to bring up or something you'd like to share with us?
All your points are spot on as far as I can see. My only gripe is that the intention of taking land is not really to redistribute it to those who've never had land. I think there's an alternative motive in this whole exercise of theirs. There's an old saying, you know, land gives you power. And if you have the land, you control the people. And that's, I think, is the problem. I think this is where the issue is with the land. I also think that the land issue in South Africa has been over exaggerated, and it's the politicians that are making the noise, not so much the people on the ground. Should you speak to the people on the ground, then you find that they just want jobs. They want jobs, really. That's all they're really interested in. Yes, I understand the land issue has to be sorted, and there has to be an amicable arrangement or some sort of ideology that comes in to redistribute some of the land, and the government sits on a lot of land. But it's this perpetual lies that gets broadcasted all the time through their narratives that really gets to me and makes me wonder what is really their agenda in the end.
It's not about actual the redistribution of land or restoring land to people who were cheated. That's part of it, and much of that process was completed in the late 1990s and into about 2005. What you're seeing now is that this is being used as a tool, a cudgel, to. I'm getting feedback on your side. It sounds like, Nigel. Do you hear that? No?
Yeah, I'm there. Let me just turn my mic down. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
How's that?
That's a little bit better. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, it's being used as a cudgel against people, and it's being used to racialize South Africa. The reality is that it's not, as you say, it's not really at this stage about land and land redistribution. Gosh, that's really noisy. All right, Keith, let me get you in here real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, I've visited quite a few times into South Africa, and I've always liked to build up an understanding of what's driving different people in different ways. Not that I can always have an input into that. And it does seem as though the overall pattern in South Africa is falling into a sort of Marxist world domination angle. Initially, that would have been supported mainly by the Soviets, perhaps now more so with the Chinese influence. But they had a program, certainly back when I had watched stuff back in the 87, and I've seen that recently, but it was a report that was done on South African soil by the American intelligence operative. And it gave a clear indication of what the route was going to be over however many years it took. And it seems as though that program is actually stepping forward quite accurately, which doesn't mean to say that's where it's going to end up, but it does seem as though they are making the progress they want to make.
No, I'd say that seems to be the case, and they're also using false arguments. One of the maybe it's my mic that's acting up now, but one of the false arguments that's put forward here is that land is the source of wealth. Land can be a source of wealth, but that's a medieval mindset. That's what was medieval Europe and kingdoms around the world. That's not the 21st century. You can own land and have wealth as a consequence of it if you use it productively, but people can create wealth out of thin air. It comes out of people's minds. The app that we're talking on right now that created this possibility for those of you in South Africa to be on a conversation with me right here is from somebody's mind. That was wealth created out of thin air. Now, it didn't come without a cost. Someone had to be educated. They had to have a political system that gave them the ability to be creative and to profit from their creation, which is what we have in America. It's under assault, but that's what we have. But the point is that land is no longer the only source of wealth and prosperity. And in fact, South Africans should be focused on proper education and getting educated and entering workforce with their creative ideas so that people like Elon Musk don't have to come to America for their opportunity. They can have their opportunity in South Africa instead of being denied that opportunity. Nigel, what do you think of that?
I agree. There's a comment here by a fellow called Scott Walters. He says, yeah, which I quite agree with him. He says, government owns most of the land. Why do they not distribute what they have first? The motivation for the ANC is not so much to get land, but rather other assets, pension funds, SARS, treasury, which is what you discussed the other night, which is really true. This is really what they want to get their hands on. To me, to put it bluntly, the current elitist or government in power today are gangsters, period. They really are. So it's not, they don't believe in communism. They don't believe in socialism. they're using those as smoke screens to the populace who really have nothing, making promises which they're never going to deliver anyway. That's the real problem that I see. Yeah, what else can I say?
So Nigel, let me be clear about something too. When you say us, you're talking about the people of South Africa, aren't you? Just to be clear, because right, there'll probably be some troll that comes in. Oh, you just mean old white guys. No, you mean us, the people of South Africa, which is what my argument is. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's absolutely that's what's going on here. It's not a legitimate discussion, and as I've warned people all along, because I didn't hear people bring this issue up, but the expropriation without compensation is about grabbing your tangible assets. The land is a smokescreen. That will happen if they do this. Don't get me wrong. People will be dispossessed, no doubt. But what's going on here is it's an effort to get a hold of the things that they can't take now. Because under the existing Constitution, in Section 25, you can confiscate Nigel's retirement account right now. But you must compensate him fairly, which means you have to give the money right back. But with expropriation without compensation, they can just start taking money out of your retirement account and say it's legal. Okay? But you know what? Apartheid was legal too, but that doesn't mean it was moral.
Well, exactly, precisely. The thing that also, the other fear that I've got is that should they continue with this exercise and actually get to the point where they start confiscating the property, is that we will be heading for civil war. That's just the point blank. That's what it's going to boil down to. But, and not so much amongst the blacks themselves, but amongst some of the white community. I will not accept it, period. I come out of a situation in the 1960s when I've gone through this kind of nonsense, and I don't need to go through this again. You know, and certainly not my kids neither. That's my fear. My hope at the moment, it's like I said last night, is the glimmer of light that a lot of South Africans are actually waking up to this fact. And slowly but surely, they're turning the screws on the government. Whether it's effective or whether it's going to play out the correct way, that only the time will tell.
Well, Nigel, and the point you make there is they've never been serious about land reform. Let me make the perfect example of this. So in this year's budget, they set aside $35 million for land, to do land restitution, to purchase land, and somebody's phone's ringing, and to distribute land, $35 million. At the same time, they put aside 48 billion rand for Eskom to bail out this failed state enterprise, and 16 billion rand in loan guarantees for SAA before it went bankrupt into business rescue. So when you spend $35 million and you spend $500 million and over $1 billion for two state-owned entities, what are you serious about? $35 million is not even going to buy a decent wine estate in the Cape, in the Western Cape. That's a ridiculous sum.
Yeah.
Nigel, any last thoughts? I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna bring Brett in here. Okay, well, I'm going to bring Brett in here. Once I've got him in, then I'll drop you off. I keep it to 2. Thanks for sharing. And what you're talking about is the stuff that took place back in the late 60s in the liberation era and African nationalism. Well, thanks for that. Let me try to get Brett in. If I get him in here, then we'll get Nigel off. Keith, anything to add so far?
Yeah, I think with the land reform, it started off with them doing the willing buyer, willing seller. And from what I've been able to understand, there were 2 failure aspects to that. One was people would take over the land and it would fall into disuse because they were unable to do the farming. Farming is not that easy. It's quite a complex, risk involved business. And then the other problem they had was that people would be given the land. They would then either run it down to nothing or just decide to sell it immediately. And that land then came legally back as property for the white people who were good at doing the farming. So they realized that their overall strategy in trying to put land into the hands of the black population, maybe as a functioning reality, get 80% of the land farmed by black people, that might have been the overall aim, and they weren't able to achieve that.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that, because the African National Congress at a time when the rest of the world is modernizing and automating and reducing the number of people that work in agriculture around the planet, the African National Congress comes out and says we want to get 1 million people working on farms. Are they insane? I appreciate that they're trying to get jobs for people, but you can create a lot more jobs in the IT sector than, go ahead.
But significantly, they actually took out all the mine workers by allowing the mines to mechanize. And whereas the Afrikaner apartheid government was keeping people in work in those environments.
Not good point.
Chris, can I say something?
Yeah, Nigel.
I know they. I think when they mention 1,000 farm workers, they're probably thinking of the old Soviet collective farms. Is probably what they would like to implement.
Well, I think it's just, to me, I think it's just populist. I don't think they're that stupid. The ANC has some really well-educated people who attended all the nifty schools in the West. You know, they've been to the UK, they've been to the US, they go to Harvard, Princeton, they go to Oxford. They got people with talent. I think that it's just a smokescreen. They know they're not going to put 1 million people to work on farms, and it's not going to be effective. And collectivization is not going to work. It's just something they're using to try to get popular support, and it flies in the face of common sense. It really doesn't make any sense. So Brett's with us. Hey, Brett, what do you got?
What's going on, Chris? Do you think the ANC and the EFF are actually in cahoots with one another? Because the EFF's behind the ANC with this expropriation without compensation. But the expropriation without compensation, it's not going to go to the average EFF supporters. It's going to go to the land's going to go to the ANC government, and then the ANC government decides who it gets redistributed to. And it's not going to go to an average EFF supporter. I mean, that's just common sense. It's going to go to the ANC's cronies like Mugabe, Zimbabwe. It went to Mugabe's cronies. What's your take on that? I mean, that the EFF's claims to be against the ANC and everything else except this. But it doesn't add up. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it just looks fishy to me.
Listen, the EFF is a bunch of political opportunists who will do anything they can. Listen, the EFF went into a coalition government in Nelson Mandela Bay with the Democratic Alliance. Of course, they later stabbed the Democratic Alliance in the back by wanting to cut the throat of whiteness by going after Athol Trollop. So the EFF, they're political opportunists. They'll say and do whatever they need to get attention and buy votes. That's what's going on here. So the ANC, even though EFF was talking about expropriation without compensation before this was raised and passed in Parliament, the ANC was voting it down year after year. The only reason that they allied with the EFF was because they were losing votes and they wanted to steal the popular narrative back. That's what was happening there. So yes, they are in cahoots in some respects, but they're in cahoots for mutual reasons. But the EFF would turn on the ANC just like the fact that it exists. The reason it exists is because its members turned on the ANC because their feelings were hurt, their bum was sore, because their exalted little retarded, uneducated, buffoon, tubblard, piece of crap, freaking party leader, Julius Malema. By the way, he slimmed down quite a bit. He's quite a svelte-looking fellow now. I don't know if that's lockdown or he's got a good personal trainer, but Julius Malema, the reason that the EF exists is because he left the party because he was kicked out, and then he took a bunch of people with him who were angry and uninformed.
He was kicked out of the ANC for embezzling money, and then he carried that stuff over with the VBS bank scam.
Exactly. Those are skills he learned in the EFF at the ANC Youth League, and he took them to the EFF with him. But yeah, so one more thing back to, I think it was Keith mentioning a moment ago, was, and we didn't really fully tease this out. Let me tease this out a little bit here, is that one of the challenges, and I write about that in my article, it's in this paper that there you go. It doesn't show up unless it's in front of my face because of that. But the article, that's what I get for using a fake background, looking like I'm looking over the planet. But anyway, so one of the things that's not real here is, so what's going to happen in a perpetuity with this nonsense is people are going to say that, for instance, they'll use this racial argument, well, whites have stolen land and dispossessed blacks in South Africa. Okay, well, that becomes a problem when land is purchased by the government and distributed to black South Africans, poor black South Africans, or coloreds, or whoever. And then they don't run the farms, or they decide that they can't make a living and they sell the land. And if a white South African buys the land, that land cannot legitimately be considered part of the discussion about white-owned land. That has to be land that's put in a separate category. But it has not been, and it will not be. Now, why is this important? Let me give you an example. In Zimbabwe, 42% of all the land that was designated as commercial farmland was sold at least once between 1980 and 2000. In that 20-year period, almost half the commercial farmland changed hands at least one time. Some of it 3, 4, and 5 times. That's just the nature of farming. Land changes hands. So what happens is you've got 42% of land changing hands. And then in 2000, we hear Mugabe start telling lies about kith and kin and racism and settler columns in 1890 and how all the land was pilfered and taken, disregarding the fact that 25% of the commercial farmland in Zimbabwe was not even farmland. It was turned into commercial farmland by hard scrabble work by the commercial farmers who irrigated it and fertilized the soil and made it something useful. So that's an additional 25% of land that was brought into agricultural use that wasn't in use. And then of all the total, 42%. So if the South African government doesn't change the way that it looks at land, which it's not going to do, then you're going to have the situation where today I'm a black South African. The government bought 1,000 hectares. They turn it over to me and my family. I start growing pineapples, and guess what? I'm an idiot. You can't grow pineapples in the northern Karoo. It doesn't work. There's no water. So I fail, and I want to sell my land. I sell it to Keith. He's a white man, and Keith gets the farmland, and now it gets considered for expropriation without compensation because a white man owns it. That's racialization, and that's where we're at, and it needs to stop.
Well, I'm just going to add that in Mugabe, Zimbabwe, when he started the EWOC, when Mugabe first took power in the 1980s, it was not that bad. And it was not that bad as far as the whites continue with the farms, blacks had political freedom. It was really good. But then the 2000s, when he did the EWOC, black unemployment increased drastically. And it was and that's one reason they had like a 95% unemployment rate. And most of those people that were unemployed were black Zimbabweans.
Well, what they did when they attacked the agricultural sector in Zimbabwe is they undermined the economy in total. So people look at the economy from the outside. Now, there's an economist that was teaching in North Carolina who wrote a book on this, fantastic academic work, so you really got to stick with it. But he wrote this book back in the early part of the 2000s after the farm invasion took place. He's not a Zimbabwe expert, but he's an economist that used to work at the World Bank, and he teaches at a university in North Carolina. It's one of these academic books that costs like $100 a copy. I managed to get it because it was subsidized by the event that he spoke at. I got it for like $40. Really good. And he talks about this, and he points this out about how you take a sector like agriculture, which was just 16% of GDP at the time in a successful Zimbabwe, relative successful Zimbabwe, and by attacking it, you destroy and undermine the entire economy. And why is that? Well, because farmers borrow money to buy seed and to pay salaries and to expand their operations from banks. Banks loan money. They make profits off that. Farmers buy fertilizer, they buy tractors. The tractors used to be made in Zimbabwe. All the parts are made there, and that ecosphere spreads out and covers the entire country. And by attacking the farms, they undermine that. Not to mention the 700,000 black Zimbabweans who were farm workers, most of them living on the farms where they worked. Their homes were there, and they were receiving their salaries from there. So yeah, it was just catastrophic damage. And if such a situation would happen in South Africa, it'd be the same thing. But what's ironic with South Africa is that up until now, the ANC, not entirely, but by and large, has been consistent whenever anybody squats on land. If someone owns the land and they report it to the police, not entirely, but overwhelmingly, the ANC will send people out to remove people from land. Now, there's been a lot of squatting on land. Oftentimes, it's land owned by a large landowner who's not present or a foreign landowner, and they move on to it, and no one really pays attention. It's too late, and they just, okay, it's a fait accompli. But in instances where farms have been invaded in South Africa, the SAPs have gone out and removed people and restored property in most cases. So they have been adhering to the rule of law because it has worked. But what's happening now is that they have lost support in the electorate, and they're doing anything they can to get it back.
Okay, I got you. Well, I'm going to head on, but thanks for doing this show because people in the world need to know what the expropriation without compensation, how bad of a damage it's going to be just for not just for South Africa, but the entire continent in Africa. I mean, the entire continent of Africa. It's a disastrous thing waiting to happen. And then other countries might catch on thinking South Africa is doing the right thing, and then they'll give up their land and we'll just have a worldwide Marxist problem. And communism has killed more people than Nazi fascism. I mean, it has. But go ahead.
That's true, Brett. But there's, what happens is instead of looking at success stories, the world is looking at failures. These political leftists are looking at failures and trying to adopt them. Let's look at success stories. Peru reformed land tenure. Peru was a country full of serfs, essentially, people who didn't own the land and worked the farmland and belonged to others. They did land tenure reform. People got access to title to their land, and now they had collateral. They could borrow money. They borrowed money for seed corn. They borrowed money for fertilizer, and Purdue's economy blossomed and grew because people had rights to land, and law protected their rights to land. South Korea, same situation. Land reform took place there.
I lived in South Korea for 2 years. Yeah, the same old program by Park Chung-hee, and he did some things I didn't like, but he did a lot of things I did like. It cleared the debt of a lot of farmers. The government funds the debt, but it gave people rights to land. The government helped reform their house, but the people ultimately still owned the property, and they didn't have to give up their land.
Absolutely,
But go ahead.
Nigel, go ahead.
In the end, Chris, I believe that this whole communist socialist ideology, that punting, is really nothing to do about communism, socialism. It's purely self-enrichment. period. And they're using this as a smokescreen. And the sooner people realize that, the better for all of us, because now you know what they're after. They're really after to self-enrich themselves. That's the bottom line. They are just plain crooks. That's all it is. Nothing to do with communism. Look how rich Mr. Ramaphosa is. He's a wealthy, wealthy man. He owns a couple of game farms. Do you think he's going to give up his land? Of course not. Yeah. It's all a political ploy to get themselves richer. And that's been the history of Africa. You know that. You've been there. You've seen it. I've seen it. And that's all it is. Look at Angola. Not even Angola. Yeah, well, look at Angola with the Santos at the moment. You know, she's admitted that she sold oil, busy doing a deal with the South African government, and there's a kickback for them. Who? The politicians. Look at Mozambique. Mozambique has the 99-year lease on their land. Who actually profits from that? The politicians, not the people. So to me, this is just a smokescreen. And the minute we move away from the, as we say in South Africa, the rooi gevaar ideology, which means the red communist, the communism as such, the sooner we see what the game is. And that's my, and the ironic thing about it is that they go on a podium and they say, we must pray to God. Well, what God are you praying to?
The God of finance.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Nigel, there's a great point. So I think that's what the narrative has to be. So the opposition parties in South Africa, I agree, need to switch from talking about socialism, communism, the evils of that, and talk about the evils of corruption, self-enrichment. And that's what's going on here. So you're right about Dos Santos. I get a kick out of the fact that like Forbes Africa and all these other popular press were talking about Isabella Dos Santos as this brilliant businesswoman, the wealthiest woman in Africa, how she amassed this wealth. She's a freaking criminal. She's always been a criminal. She stole the money, and it was handed to her because of her political connections. So it's good to see that she's finally exposed for that, and they're going after her. But, you know, the bottom line, and this is the bottom line here, and I've talked about that in my article, and I've talked about it on my streams. If the ANC actually cared about poor black South Africans, and they care about property, they would address the single largest issue when it comes to land. And that is not farmland. That is a place to put your house down, put a plot down, and have property so you own that property. It's yours. Absolutely. That's the single biggest issue. Urban land claims are the most serious issue because people are living in squalor and they want to live in a decent house. And that's not what they're addressing. And you can address this overnight and create several million property owners and redistribute land instantly. It costs not a single private citizen in South Africa R1. And how do you do that? You issue title to RDP housing to every occupant of an RDP house. It's their land. Now they can do what they want.
They have done that. They have, as far as I understand, they have issued title deeds to those RDP houses. They have done that, but they found that the minute they got the title deals, they sold the house and to get the money, and then went and spent it on useless things. So the culture of home, security for yourself, it doesn't seem to be there as yet. Although there is, we've got a little town called Cosmos City just outside where I stay. A beautiful little place, and there is a certain percentage of the population that do want houses, that do buy houses and take care of their houses, etc., etc. Our problem is within the locations. They need to be uplifted somehow. They meant to say, okay, whose land is this? Make a plan, buy the land, and give those guys title deeds to that piece of property so they can start building permanent structures and put infrastructure into the place. To me, that seems to be the logical thing, but they don't seem to want to do that.
No, I think you're right. But now the RDP title thing was not comprehensive. They need to issue to everyone. But you're right. People just saw it. But see, now people ask me, what do you want to do? What's your ambition? Well, I've missed out on a number of things.
Sorry to interrupt, but I gotta go, Chris. It was nice talking to you. You guys take care.
Cheers, Brett. Thank you.
Take care, Brett.
Have a blessed day.
Thanks, Brett.
All right, thanks, Brett. Yeah, people ask me, have always asked me what it is I want to do, and I've missed out on some things intentionally. Back in the 1990s, I was teaching at Iowa State in uniform, in military, teaching ROTC officer leadership there, and it was just after Mosaic came out, and we saw the first graphics-based web browser, so it made life easy for people who are novices. And so I decided that I was interested in that, so I contacted Excite and Yahoo. There were two new companies, and I had an opportunity to go work for them, but I had to leave the Army. Decided I didn't want to do that, so I passed up on it. So I missed the IT revolution as I saw it unfold in front of me. Conscious decision. The next thing was that in the late 1990s, I moved to Italy, and I was able to buy a mobile phone. It was GSM, and it weighed nothing, and it lasted for 24 hours, the battery, and I could call anywhere in Europe for 35 cents a minute, which to me was revolutionary. And I'm like, why don't we have this in, say, Africa? If we had these in Africa, we wouldn't need landlines. And so then I watched as the IT revolution, or the cell phone revolution unfold in Africa, and I wasn't part of it. Then the next one was I was in Africa in the early part of the aught decade, and I saw everybody using text messaging after I'd seen the same thing in the UK. I'm like, you people are crazy. I have to pay 10 cents a text in the States. I would never text. That's crazy. But people did it. So I was like, wait a second. You know, I see all these people standing in line at MoneyGram and Western Union for hours trying to get money. You could eliminate all that by just using mobile phones. Well, the M-Pesa system was born in Tanzania and in Kenya, and I missed out on that. So the last great idea that I have that I haven't done is that I would like to bring retail banking to all Africans in a way that not only brings retail banking so people have access to checking accounts, savings accounts, financial instruments, and I'm talking about small scale, not people who are wealthy, people that actually, so they start inculcating the right values about saving your seed corn and investing for tomorrow. Much of Africa, people have always had short lifespans. Life has been tough, and you didn't save for tomorrow. You ate most of your seed corn because you might not have it tomorrow. Lifespans were short. Well, that's not the world today. So I'd like to inculcate those values and make a profit and spread that in Africa. Anyway.
I have an idea which I'd like to post to you, but we'll do it once we're offline. We can have a little private discussion. My wife came up with an idea which I thought was absolutely brilliant. I'm not an entrepreneur, but it would help all South Africans, regardless of who they are and what they are. But we'll talk about it later.
Cool beans.
Just remind me. I can bounce it off you and tell me what you think of it.
Sure. There was a comment in here from Anthony Papenfuss. That's a cool name. I always love the name Papenfuss. The ANC has always made empty promises. In 1994, they promised free houses and education. In 2020, everyone is still waiting in line. Okay, Anthony, fair point, but in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a full disclosure kind of guy. The ANC did promise things, but they promised to build 1 million homes within 5 years. They did not achieve that, but they did build the 1 million homes within about 6 or 7 or 8 years. So they did achieve the things that they said they were going to do. If you look at those who have access to pipe water now and to sanitation and to electrification, the numbers have jumped exponentially. They've stalled because now their focus for 15 years has been on pilfering the economy, not improving people's lives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Keith, you got something?
Well, I was going to say, when you're looking at the leadership in any country, I mean, over here we tend to have this bi-party, Conservative, Labour, Liberal chipping in, and you've got kind of political ideology. In South Africa, it seems like if you just look, say, at the ANC themselves, there's probably 3 key groups within that. You've got those who are politically, ideologically looking for Marxism. You've got those.
Erica, turn your volume down.
You've got those who want.
Sorry, Keith. Erica, I think you've got the channel on, so you've got to put on mute. It's coming back in feedback.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Well, I was going to.
That's what happens when you let rookies in the conversation. Sorry, Keith. Go ahead. Go ahead. Continue.
You've got the ideological group. There's 3 groups, I think, mainly. The ideological group, then you've got the Africa for the Blacks, and they're actually predominantly racist. And then you've got the other group who want South Africa to move forward, but they believe that there is a need for redistribution of wealth and opportunity. And some are thinking, well, that can be done by just seizing it. Other people are saying, no, you've got to negotiate these things and allow the skilled black people to move into positions. So you've got these tensions going on in the ANC, and I don't think they're playing it out very well necessarily, but that probably means that different groups of those have different power abilities to achieve their degree of progress in the direction they want to go. That's my understanding of where they've got to. And a little aside, in the UK, back in the 70s, we had a socialist government coming in, and they slapped on wealth tax. There are about 10,000, I think it was, stately homes that just became unaffordable and were pulled down. And at one point, some of the business creators were being taxed 105 or 110% of their income, because that was the way the socialists could see of pressurizing people who had wealth and power out of the system. So these things happen in developed and established democracies, just the same as it is in South Africa. But where is it going to go next? That's the question.
That's a good point. Keith, I'm going to do a little housekeeping with some notes. I've got Marabani wants to come in. So Nigel, any last comments here? I'm going to get you to drop off. We're going to have one more person. Thanks a lot for your input, Nigel. Keith, stay with us. Before we get there, I'm going to let Marabani in as soon as Nigel's off the screen there. And then Erica has come in. Now, I believe this is the Erica who's a real veteran, who's from the Congo. Is that who it is? Is that right, Erica?
Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
All right, we're going to get to you in just a moment here. But once, Nigel, you just drop off. Leave the meeting, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thanks. And then I'll let Marabani in. And then I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping.
Cheers. Okay.
Who's leaving?
I'm going.
Not that we're not believing it. You're still there, man. Okay, there he goes.
He tried to leave. He
couldn't get out. He was, just when I thought I was out, they sucked me right back in. Yeah. So we're gonna get Marabani here in just a second, but I want to do a little housekeeping on some chat comments. So Irene Dennis said the Bantu stands and gambling casino resorts were linked. Saul Kersner really took advantage, but now Sun International are retrenching big time. Yeah, no, Irene, you're spot on. Saul Kersner was a brilliant guy when it comes to business. He saw an opportunity, the Calvinist repression of the National Party, and people wanting to misbehave or do exciting things like gamble and hang out half naked on fake beaches in Sun City, and it paid off handsomely for him. Smart guy. He just, by the way, Saul Kersner just passed away very recently, for those who don't know. And Sun International is now renamed Soho International. So is Sun International. They renamed it. Morton Christie says it's one thing to extend these reticulations, water, electricity, etc. to everyone. It's another thing to get them all to pay for it. Absolutely. That's part of the problem here, is that a lot of people in South Africa using utilities are free riders. That's why Eskom is in such desperate straits. That's why the country is so short on cash, besides stealing. So Marabani, welcome. I'm going to get Erica in here. She got in first, so hang on a second. So Erica, please join the conversation. Erica, for people who don't know, Erica's a veteran. Now, this goes back to the Belgian Congo for her. So she can talk about the hideous things that happened there, dispossession and people being attacked and murdered for their appearance and their pigmentation. And then she moved on to different pastors. And so, Erica, welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here again. Last time was without my camera. I was born in the Congo and came through as a refugee. I can still remember things leading up to that. As I said on the side chat, Chombi was a family friend of ours. He warned us it was happening. My parents didn't believe us. He basically almost smuggled us out of the Congo, and we were the train that we were on was the last train that got out. My dad stayed behind, and Chombi organized a driver for him to bring things down from the Congo. And between the time of us arriving in South Africa and my dad leaving, everything exploded, and we didn't know if my father would come out safely. And he did. It was a miracle. So what I'm seeing now is history repeating itself. I've lived on a farm for 16 years, 18 years actually. I moved off in October last year. And we had a farm attack in end of March in 2018. But before that, I have seen farms being bought out by the government, and then good farms, commercial farms, and then going to rack and ruin with nothing growing on those farms or being produced in the years later. So I don't know what this whole thing is with wanting land and then they're not using it properly. What's going on there? To me, it is a communist ploy and trying to possess all the land and to frighten the farmers off their land, so that the land can be taken from them cheaply. That's my whole thing. I don't know, because these farm attacks are scary, and I will never forget that.
No doubt. Well, Erica, thanks for sharing that. So, Marabani, welcome. Good to see you here. How can you help us out in this conversation?
Well, my perspective is a little bit different. It's a little bit more ideological. I'm a former communist, and I was present for the Rhodes Must Fall debacle at UCT. I was there from very near the beginning. And what I noticed interestingly enough, at the very time that it started kicking off, I was reading a book by the historian Eugen Weber called Varieties of Fascism. And there's this little quote where he was one of the first people to write a history of the origins of fascism. And there was a little quote that sort of is stuck in my head verbatim, where he was interviewing people who were around from the early days of the National Socialist Party. And one of them said, "What does workers of the world unite mean to me? I'm German. I want a German National Socialism." So when I was on campus and I was listening to a lot of the discussions that were happening between various young people of my age, the key demographic for the EFF, one of the big things that was happening is that they were going, well, what is all of this sort of cosmopolitan Marxism? We want an African socialism. And the similarities are actually quite stark, because they're not interested in nationalization on this purely cosmopolitan sort of level. It's more about confiscating the property of the minority. And they're not, if you listen to discussions amongst people, even in the ANC, even in the ANC Youth League, you'll hear people who think that, well, taking land away from the whites is not enough because they'll just buy it back. So we need to actually confiscate all liquid property and all assets as well. Now, this is what was done to the Jews in Germany at the time, and the demographic comparison is actually very apt, because in Hungary and Germany and Romania, Jews were approximately 5 to 10% in each country, depending. And for example, in Hungary, Jews they had almost all of the fixed seats on the stock exchange. They were more than half of all the doctors, lawyers, accountants, and so on. Very, very similar to white people in South Africa. And there's also the connection with anti-Semitism. The identification with the Palestinian side of the IP conflict doesn't end at mere politics. I remember I remember several conversations with people talking about how, Jews are basically just white people, but worse, and they need to be gotten rid of, and so on and so forth. So, underneath all of this is a very, very racialized aspect. And I think people tend to forget the sort of fluid boundaries between National Socialism and cosmopolitan socialism that was around in Europe during the 20s and 30s. And they think, looking at the ANC, that, okay, this is all going to be left-wing. No. This is a combination between a hyper-reactionary sort of agrarian utopianist sort of vision, which is decolonization, coupled with revolutionary socialism and communism. So I think what people are failing to recognize is that we're not looking at communists, we're looking at National Socialists. And I think the other aspect is that people look at this too legalistically, as if the ANC really needs to actually confiscate land. What all they really need to do is look the other way while armed gangs seize property. And if people think that the good nature of South Africans, of ordinary black South Africans, is going to stand in the way of this, I beg to remind them of the behavior of decent people everywhere during violent revolutions, which is keep your head down, don't get shot. And you do not need more than a small minority of people to conduct a violent, repressive campaign. So I think one of the things, I think we have to sort of bear these factors in mind. At least that's my opinion. I'm only a sort of student, so I don't have a huge amount of direct hands-on experience, but I do read a little bit of history. So.
Well, you don't need a lot of direct experience there, Bonnie. Some great comments. Thanks for sharing them. So two things that come right to mind from your comments there, excellent comments, is the only thing that needs to happen is for decent people to keep their heads down. And that's absolutely what's happening in America right now. Where are our politicians in this country? Where are the Republicans? Where are the Democrats? And the Democrats are actually in collusion in many respects, and those who aren't in collusion are silent. The Republicans are woefully silent. The only person saying anything is Donald Trump. Like him or dislike him, he's the only person saying anything. So that's a whole other thing. So
aside from Tucker Carlson.
What's that? Yeah. That's I'm talking about politicians, leaders. Yeah, no. Tucker Carlson's actually the singular best journalist on the globe right now. The man has done the most amazing stuff. He warned people about Wuhan coronavirus, COVID-19 in early January. He ran stories. I used to have trouble watching his program because I'm not a big Fox watcher, but I did like Bill O'Reilly. But then he went so far off the reservation, he's almost like spouting conspiracy theorists, and his ego was the size of Egypt at some point. So I did like Bill O'Reilly, but he was getting to be that stuffy old white guy that knew everything, and I didn't want to have two of us in the room, so I turned him off. Anyway, but when Tucker Carlson came in, I just remember Tucker Carlson when he was on CNN. He used to wear a bow tie. I'm like, okay, I can't take this guy seriously, but he's done a singularly amazing job with his reporting, especially since 2019. And now so now they're trying to deplatform him. People are trying to get rid of him. They'll probably come out with some fake Me Too claims against him. You just watch, it's coming, because they're terrified of Tucker Carlson because he's exposing everybody, Republicans, Democrats, Chinese communists, the EU, everybody that's frauding us. But Marabani, so yeah, decent people sitting by and doing nothing. That's what we have happening here. I've had people contact me recently, ask me, will you step up? Will you step into the frame? Because we're scared. Actually reaching out to me. I'm like, okay, if you're reaching out to me, then you must really be scared. I just got out of the Army, okay? So, and the other thing is that you mentioned, you're right, the ANC doesn't have to expropriate land. They just walk away, look the other way when people steal it, when armed gangs take over things. That's all they need to do. And in fact, that's why I made the point that until recently, every time that people invaded land, almost without fail, the ANC would remove them. But now it's turning to their advantage to simply ignore that, potentially.
I would draw the distinction and say that it wasn't the ANC that removed them, because the court system has actually been one of the most resistant organs of state to political capture. And I think that they're sort of the one thing that's standing between unstructured land seizures and, so I wouldn't call it the ANC. In fact, I think the ANC are quite have a growing hostility to the rule of law and to the court system for that reason in particular.
Well, I don't disagree, but the point being that when someone occupied land in Gauteng, say 5 years ago, and they sent SAPs out and they removed those people from the land after a court order, the ANC had control of SAPs, they had control of Gauteng, and they could have ignored the court order and just, so yes, in principle, I get your point there. Well, Marabani, those are some great comments. I really appreciate your feedback. Keith, you're still with us. Any of this resonating?
Yeah, there's some very interesting angles. The government is in a situation in all the countries where they need a certain amount of money to do what they want to do. They are looking around the world to see who will actually support them. The pressure from the current world situation at the moment, I think, does affect South Africa, but I don't know to what extent.
No, I agree. It's interesting. And when I wrote the article a couple years ago, this issue wasn't quite nearly where it's at now. And so I asked some questions about it. And the questions I asked were, who lost land since 1910? Because I agree that 1910 is a reasonable date for land restitution because there was no country prior to that. And you had living relatives, or you knew your grandparents that might have suffered from that, and parents and such. So I think that was reasonable. So who lost land since 1910? And that, for me, it was reframing the debate, because I point out in my article things like the historical narrative that's being thrown out by the EFF now is whites stole all the land. Okay, well, so did the Bantu. They stole the land from the Khoi and the San. So how far do you want to go back? We can have this conversation in Israel. The Palestinians claim that the land was stolen from them. Well, yeah, well, you stole it from the Jews 5,000 years ago. Okay, come on. You can play this game into perpetuity. Someone has always stolen land from someone else at some point in history. So who lost land since 1910 is a good question to start with. And then my question was, who wants land? You don't have 43 million black South Africans who want land. You might have 8 or 10 million who want to have land for a house. You might have a couple 100,000 who might want a farm. You might, so that's a question, rather than just make this blanket statement that black land first, that nonsense. Then the next question is, what do people want to use the land for? Well, I mean, if you have this idea, say you're a Zulu and you want to have this citrus farm in the Northern Cape, well, that ain't going to work too well unless you're along the river. So what do you want to use the land for? What's the purpose of it? And then where would you like the land? If you are a San and you now find yourself living in Johannesburg, do you want land in Johannesburg, or do you want to get land historically where you came from in the Western Cape? That's important. And then what are the plans for agricultural support, extension services, and vocational technical skills training? Almost non-existent by the government of South Africa, as they were in Zimbabwe. You don't just turn land over to people who aren't prepared and don't have capital and resources to make it productive. Then you get disasters, which is what we had there. And is there a partnership plan for fixing the issue together? Landowners, farmers, government, provincial, national. Ironically, it gets virtually no coverage, but there are many white commercial farmers in South Africa who've gone out of their way to help new black commercial farmers in South Africa with extension services of their own, providing training, assistance, credit, helping them advice, mentoring, and it gets no coverage whatsoever. We just see white farmers demonized when it's just nonsense. Erica, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I do. I've seen that happening locally, but around the farm where I lived, the farmers stepping in, the white farmers stepping in and trying to help. And many a times they were chased off the farms eventually and they were told by the new owners, no, they know how to farm. But the reality is farming in South Africa is very difficult. You can't just plant a milli put in the ground and let it grow. You've got to nurture it, and it's a scientific based thing. You can't just produce food without putting thought into it, preparing and thinking ahead, and putting seeds aside for the next harvest and that type of thing. And they don't do that. They go out and buy themselves these big vehicles, and then with what it lets over, they throw that into the farm, hoping it will work. And then if it doesn't, then they throw their hands in the air and say it didn't work for us.
No, absolutely.
Which is unfortunate.
Absolutely. So go ahead, Marabani. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think a lot of these questions are a lot of your analysis, if I may, is a little bit too object level. I don't think that I mean, we all know that they're not thinking about this on a rational level. And I think that, I mean, it's much like, one of your best philosophers, American philosophers, Harry Frankfurt, sort of had this idea called of a philosophical perspective of bullshit. And he says that, so bullshit is distinct from lying. And this is a very powerful political idea that is a very powerful philosophical idea that is underanalyzed. He says that bullshit is speech that does not care about the truth value of its statements, but only cares about the effect. And the ANC is conducting politics entirely behind bullshit. The desire for land has nothing to do with its economic value. It is entirely to do with the notion of racial dignity. And so it's about the pride in completely owning and dominating the entire land of South Africa. And it's the sort of the common use of rhetoric to refer to minorities in the country is very, very revealing. I mean, Steve Biko, who's basically a saint, no one can ever criticize him. If you read his works, if you actually read what he writes, he sort of says that, well, black people are the most human of all the races. And white people are sort of these inhuman, machine-like creatures who have no compassion or capacity for appreciation of music or physical affection. And while colored and Indian people have some of this quality, they would be better served by identifying with black and absorbing themselves into our more human culture. And that, and his segregationism is generally accepted. White people really have no place in political society for people who are followers of him. And I think it's an absolute consensus amongst my generation. Even white people who go to universities really, really believe that it's our turn to die. And you can have these conversations and they'll state it as bluntly as that. I don't think that this has anything to do with economics. It's pure and simple about domination and revenge. The rhetoric about sweeping us into the sea is very common. We refer to as 1652s, just to remind us that we don't belong here. This is reminiscent of Rwandan genocidal rhetoric, and in fact, in many cases, it's much more open because the Rwandans constantly used euphemisms, whereas our politicians openly call for murder. So I think what we're looking at here is something where everyone's busy trying to win a rational argument. And here's the thing where the international sphere gets into the picture. Because every single institution in the whole of the Western world is captured by the left. There will be no humanitarian outcry. There will be nobody coming to save us if things go wrong. And unless an absolute miracle happens, and let's say Herman Mashaba decides, oh, okay, I'm going to have this pan-racial sort of culturally conservative, economically liberal political program with, strong state, anti-crime, etc. Unless he manages to win outright with a clear majority in the coming election, I just simply do not see any chance of this situation fixing itself. And in my mind, and I know this is an extremely pessimistic view of South Africa, I watched the vice chancellor of my university promoting the thesis of a student who I'd met personally, very, very serious genocidaire, called Masipole Mlandu, promoting his thesis publicly, saying, well done, this is great, I'm proud of you. His thesis directly sort of argues that genocide is the solution to the settler colonial problem in South Africa. This is allowed. This is promoted in public. Every journalist in the country finds apologies for this. So we are talking about a very, very serious problem. And the question we have to ask here is, are there any serious people, any serious political organizations who are thinking about collective defense? And frankly, the problem that I see is that the only people who are taking it seriously are completely insane. Like, the Sightlanders who believe that, and the problem with them is the same problem with Hamas, which is, because everything's preordained by the prophet, we don't have to worry where our rockets land because God will guide them to the enemy. And so, and no one's thinking about supply lines. Nobody's thinking about urban warfare. Nobody's thinking about anything like this. I really don't know who to talk to about these matters. I mean, because I talk to Dutch people over here. I'm a member of a Dutch conservative political organization, and I tried to get them to sort of have a chat with even really moderate, culturally liberal, middle of the road guys like AfriForum, and they were like, "Oh no, I don't know. I don't want to touch that in case it looks bad," and there's really nowhere that South Africa is going to go outside for help. And I think the issue here is it has to be done internally. And the one thing that I fear most of all is something that I noticed from looking at the people who showed up from overseas in the Rwandan bush war. So all, like Canadians, Americans, Germans, whatever, they came because they had a big fetish for white supremacy. They misbehaved really atrociously and killed and tortured people unnecessarily. And they ran away when the fighting got too tough. And so the assistance we're going to get from overseas, I really, where it will come from, I almost don't want to have it.
No, listen, Marabani, I'm with you. I've been in this movie. I played a role in this movie. The world will not help, and some South Africans tune into my channel. What are you doing to help us? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to come like Delare and lead people in defense? Is that the plan? I know that I'm getting the beard. I'm starting to look like a boar. I'm looking at Trek boar here, but no. But seriously, I had orders to go to Rwanda, a warning order to deploy to Rwanda within 48 hours, and we never went because of Bill Clinton and his Secretary of State and Kofi Annan and their collusion to prevent people from going into Rwanda. We watched 850,000 people hacked to death with machetes. What a horrific situation. If the world watches 1 million people be hacked to death, they're not going to come to South Africa to stop disorder and chaos there. Now, Marabani, back to your point about I'm approaching it from not a philosophical, but what was the word you used for it?
Object level.
Object level. That's a fair point. But bear in mind, I wrote this in April of 2018, so it was about a lot has happened since then, and I didn't disbelieve what you're saying about what the actual goal here is, because I've said this. What I've always told people about the ANC is this. I said, and this is an anecdotal statement, but I think it bears validity. What I've always said with the ANC is that until about 2015, 2016, the ANC is comprised of lots of people: white South Africans, Jews, communists, black South Africans, coloreds, Indians. And there are actually a lot of good people in the party. This was what I said then, okay? Hang on.
Yep.
And I said the balance is that 60% of the ANC, why is it doing this noise? 60% of the ANC is comprised of multiracial, Rainbow Nation, reasonably tied to the market-based economy, 60%. 40% are dyed-in-the-wool, leftists, African nationalists, black African nationalists, kill all the white people and drive them into the sea. And if it ever gets to the stage where it's 50-50, South Africa's in trouble. I see it now as the scale is tipped where it's 60-40 in the wrong direction.
I would agree with you there.
And I think that is really what we've got going on here. That's a real problem. I do like, now I've got to ask you this question, not to let Marabani, hijack the whole conversation, but it's fascinating. No, because I'm asking the question. Okay, you started this by saying that you were a former communist. What happened there? Did you usually people don't wake up till they're 30 or 40 or 50, but what happened in your case?
Well, okay, this is a silly story because so I was sort of taught about Marxism by I did A levels in the UK because my father went and got a job up there, and I studied. I was taught philosophy. I took all of the subjects that you couldn't get back home in South Africa: philosophy, music, sound engineering, all of that stuff, just because I was getting excited. And so he taught me about Karl Marx and John Stuart Mill, and those two philosophers I sort of carried as my sort of core guiding lights for political ideas for many years. And so when I came to UCT, I'd also spent a year working as a manual laborer on a farm in Northwest Province, learning Setswana and doing whatever. And I'd experienced being promoted specifically because I was white, or giving jobs because I was white. I met black people who were saying, who believed that they were inferior, totally internalized the whole olden day caste system. And this horrified me. I thought, how can this be possible that people can think of themselves this way? So when I got to university, I had sort of like, because the ANC is a socialist organization, I was very frustrated with their corruption and their hesitance to enact policies. But I always thought, well, we agree on the basic values here. All we need to do is put a little bit of pressure, and through democratic reforms, we will eventually get to communism. So I wasn't one of these revolutionary butcher all the dissidents types. I really thought, it's a model that everyone will accept once they realize what it contains. And I also believed in absolute democracy at every level of society. And what happened at UCT is that I saw a completely leaderless, headless movement form, very spontaneous, totally the perfect formula for what my ideology would presuppose. I thought the initial sort of cause was maybe a bit off, but a lot of people joined it with what I thought were legitimate grievances at the time. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go behind this. This is the will of the people. I'm going to do this. So I went and occupied admin buildings with them. I donated money. I was all in. But then they started saying, no, we actually need segregated leadership, and we need segregated meetings. And I thought, okay, fuck this shit. This is going off the deep end. And I started writing to my fellow radicals and saying, hey guys, this is actually quite concerning. And I'm worried that if we go down this road within maybe 10 years or whatever, there'll be people out there who are basically black Nazis. It took 1 month. It took 1 month for that to happen. And so my sort of like starry-eyed naivety sort of, my God, I was outpaced by reality, and I was totally shunned by absolutely everyone. And I got death threats. People were having fun coming and mocking, threatening to kill me in front of my family in broad daylight in my house. And it was a nightmare. I gained an absolutely unbearable paranoia that took me years to get out of.
No,
So,
it's good to see you saw the light of day, because these are the tactics of these clowns. So I mean, we're already seeing it in the autonomous zone in Seattle, or Chaz, Chop, whatever they want to call themselves, where people are setting up segregated sectors. You know, we spent decades supposedly to integrate society so that people had equal and fair opportunities, only to see people self-segregate and then say it's okay for them to do it, but for another group it's not okay. It's just insane. At the University of Missouri, in the wake of the Ferguson, hands up nonsense, the lie that was perpetuated there, University of Missouri students in the dormitory, if you saw the footage, they told white students who were in solidarity with them to get out. They had no say in the voice, and kicked them out of their own lounge in their own dormitory, which they pay fees to use. You know what I say to people like that? Sec. You're just a bunch of terrorists. You're fascists. That's what you are. And that's what we have happening here in the States right now.
Evil.
We have fascism going on in the States right now, and people are good people are silent, and they need to stand up. It's the same thing that's happening in South Africa.
Well, I think that they just don't have a frame for it. The thing is, nobody really understands what fascism looks like. We've been socialized to believe that there's a spectrum where the right hand is Adolf Hitler and the left hand is Joseph Stalin.
Right.
And somewhere in the middle is all of this nonsense that we call normal society. And the additional trick that has been played on us is the idea that any rightward compromise is sort of splitting the difference with Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
And that's, that was Rosa Luxemburg's little formula, socialism or barbarism. And so everyone gets this inexorable ratchet towards the left. The problem is that people's understanding of what's left and right is also colored by ethnicity. And so the ordinary person's understanding of political ideas is on a very simple level. And no matter how intellectual you get on the matter, people see things in terms of these very simple categories, and people organize in terms of groups and identities and organizations. You can't organize around a policy exactly. It's very difficult. So I think it was almost inevitable that the way of dealing with white dominance in the society was to say, oh, okay, well, I mean, this is actually the way that Steve Biko framed it. He says, well, the thesis is white supremacy, the antithesis is black power, and the synthesis is a more human society.
Yeah, right.
So, as Alan Payton said about him, he said the synthesis is just likely to be war. But I mean, this is the thing, is we don't really have an understanding. So you look at Adolf Hitler, everyone says, well, oh no, it's only people like Dinesh D'Souza and all of those, old conservative dinosaurs who are saying, socialism is fascism. They've made it sort of too stale, and they've given everybody sort of an immune reaction to that idea. And so if they hear it, they go, oh, well, that's just some trash that conservatives say to protect their, So I don't think, I think that a lot of the rhetorical battles are going to be very difficult to win. I think the only people who are really providing a decent mental toolkit for understanding how these things happened is sort of the intellectual dark web crowd, like James Lindsay and that lot, because they actually go into the step-by-step institutional processes by which academics actually introduced these ideas and justified them. And it was very, very deliberate and was very conscious. I mean, Chantal Mouffe, for example, pushing her idea that we need to extend the domain of struggle to include, sex, race, gender, etc., in order to split apart any kind of white political base. And I mean, it's very, very useful. I mean, I noticed you saw. I don't know if you saw the. There was a leaked official document from Amazon showing them saying this is actually very, very good for union busting. And so you can see a lot of interest from large corporate entities saying, well, yes, this is very good because, you can't organize a union if everyone's bickering about, gender and race. So you can see these confluence of interests lining up like a Christmas tree lighting system.
No, absolutely. So I'm going to do 2 quick points here to point out some obvious things, which not everybody may or may not know about. Then I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and then get Keith and Erica back in the conversation here. They've been very patient and watching. No, you're fine, Marbani. I wouldn't let you go on if it wasn't worth listening to. Trust me, we'll cut you off. Somebody's got the volume up again. Please turn it down. So 2 things. Number 1, but we've been told that Biko was simply about black dignity and how black people shouldn't feel inferior. It was just about that. Well, I didn't know that he was a racist. That's the first time I heard that, Marabani.
He was.
No, my point is that, how the historical narrative is played out for people. And the second thing is that don't forget that in the Soviet Union, the staunchest allies of the communists were Jews. Jews were deeply embedded in the Soviet Communist Party until they started getting eliminated by their brethren. Because when it came time to split, they weren't like me. They were different. And that's how this narrative plays out. Yeah. So a little bit of housekeeping here, a few comments in the chat. Christian Perdago said that, God, why does that sound? Please, somebody turn your volume down. Christian, being educated doesn't make you less susceptible to ridiculous conspiracy theories. I agree, Christian, and your trolling on the channel proves that. Clearly, you're an educated man, and you're always putting conspiracy theories up there. And then Christian said, those not willing to wear a mask, stay away from public areas. Oh, that's good advice, actually. D.I. Freighter Watcher says, but Chris, those who speak up get no support from the police who are under orders to stand down and allow the riots. Democrat-controlled cities are being destroyed and voice dissent and are punished. That's true. And when you see situations like we just saw in, was it in Tennessee, where the people defended their property, or St. Louis, and people invaded their property and they came out with their Second Amendment rights. They didn't shoot anybody, and now they're being charged with a crime. It's utterly insane. Corvid68 says that his father was shot, his uncle was murdered, he was threatened and nearly shot, but escaped because of, because of his initiative. Erica, speaking of that sort of thing, you saw that firsthand in the Congo and got away from that. It must be horrific to see how people divide. You had neighbors. You got along with them fine. I mean, you live with black Africans. You didn't have any disputes with them, did you?
No, not at all. In fact, my best friend was Chombe's daughter. And I used to go to his to Chombe's family home, traditional home in the jungle, once a month. And I got on very well with them. I was part of the family. They taught me how to interpret the jungle drums and all that. So I could hear the messages being relayed from village to village through the jungle. And initially it was fun. It was so-and-so's had a baby, or we're going to have a party or whatever. And then it changed. And then suddenly I realized these people were, in fact, my enemies. They wanted to kill me. And I was still very, very young. I was 5.5 when we left the Congo to come to South Africa. So that was quite something for a little girl to get her head around. And trying to realize the people that you thought were friends suddenly wanted to kill you and murder you.
It's absolutely insane. And that's exactly the world that people woke up to in 1994 in Rwanda.
Yes.
Suddenly their friends and neighbors were murdering them and herding them into churches and burning them alive. And it was just horrific. We had orders. We had warning orders to go to Rwanda to evacuate people and to separate the warring parties. Now, Mahabani, back to what we were talking about earlier, it's not going to be the world that saves you. The only reason that anybody survived in Rwanda is because Kagame and his forces, which were in Uganda and preparing to invade already, accelerated their invasion and came in, but they weren't ready for a few weeks, and we saw what happened in those few weeks. If they had not got in when they did get in, even more people would have been wiped out. Now, I'm not saying that what happened in the aftermath of that, and of course the collapse of the Eastern Congo as a consequence of the Rwandan invasion was good, but what I am saying is that they took that upon themselves. Otherwise, and here's the thing, another point Marabani said, when a real force came in, trained, disciplined fighters who were ready to defend with their lives, the cowards ran away. They went to the Congo, and the genocide ended. And the same thing will happen in South Africa if violence takes place. These little tin pot, egotistical, think they're real powerful, talking all the big boo-boo like juju will run and cower when people who are trained to deal with these things deal with them.
I wouldn't be so blasé about Julius Malema. I think as an individual, I would never call him. I'd never call him timid. And I think just based on gut feel alone, I actually think that he is the kind of person who really does have the fortitude to fight to the death. And so, from at least that perspective, I think he needs to have he needs to be accorded a little bit of respect. But he is an evil man, and I think one of the big things about him, and an interesting parallel to the Rwandan situation, is that perhaps the soundest ally that white South Africa may have will probably be Botswana, a neighboring country just like Kagame had in Rwanda. And the reason for this might actually be because of, do you actually remember what got Malema fired from the ANC, got him kicked out?
Yeah, he was going to Botswana and starting a bunch of cock.
His specific thing that he got fired for was he said that Botswana is a puppet of global capital and needs to be invaded, to be liberated. So now that is a very, very telling thing. So I think the Botswanans will be, they will be at least a little bit cognizant of this. And I think the expansionist and bullying tactics of the ANC as head of the SADC will not endear them to their neighbors. So I think also Lesotho, for one, I think that people need to be looking to the Basotho for a bit of solidarity there as well if they can, because I think sort of their hardiness and their selfstandigheid, their independence of spirit is probably going to be a fairly decent point of contact. But I think one of the worst things that we're going to be facing is that if things do kick off, getting supply lines is going to be nearly impossible. A lot of people think, oh, well, Western Cape will just declare independence and then we'll have Cape Town. No, you won't. And if you look at what the ports are on the western seaboard, there are only two, Saldanha and Port Nolloth. And Port Nolloth is so filled up with silt that no boats can get in. So, and Saldanha too close to the action. And I think people underestimate how bloody modern urban warfare is. It is absolutely atrocious, long, brutal attrition, and I think people totally underestimate this. I really don't think people are ready for. I mean, there are a lot of people on both sides, like white nationalists and black nationalists, who are looking forward to the idea of war, and I do not think they can comprehend how horrifying it's going to be if it does happen.
Absolutely. And sadly, I've seen that war up close and personal, and I prefer that folks avoid that. So, Keith, in the UK, we've got this whole situation with Brexit a couple years ago, and those who supported Brexit were demonized as old white people who were afraid of brown and black people, and that's why they went for Brexit. When that's not even close to the reality that took place here. Any thoughts on Brexit and how people were talked about on both sides of the aisle during that event?
Well, I mean, it's got parallels into South Africa and across the world in that this aspect, Kermit's just mentioned this aspect of tribalism. And like it or not, Britain was a tribal country. I mean, my history is pretty scant, but the War of the Roses was basically tribal. And the unification of tribes comes about because of events. We now have democracy, and I don't know that a lot of people really get the grips of democracy even in this country, and certainly not in South Africa, in that some of the key fundamentals of the democracy are to do with the leaders, the governors, whether they're leading or governing, it's kind of a bit of a, you can use either word. They have to agree to abide by law. The general mass of the population have to agree to abide by law. Within the democracy, you have to have a separation of those who are governing, those who are setting the laws and deciding what will work and what won't in a law, and then the law enforcement. Those kind of basic things get chewed at all the time at the edges. And I think, Marabani, you were mentioning this whole aspect of gaining the upper hand in infiltrating people's minds. And the fight for the minds of people becomes fundamental. I mean, Chris, you'll know all about the total war of the ANC, where they pulled in more and more information hubs to get the information out to the rest of the world. Whether it was true or not, as you were mentioning, Marabon, doesn't really matter. Just get it out there, influence how people think, and then the decisions will come because people just go along with it. They just think, well, if that's true, then this has to be, this has to be, this has to be. So if I kind of rumble it down to the Brexit situation, it was a shock to the leaders in Britain. They wanted or were expecting an endorsement of stay in Europe. Oddly, I didn't vote. I didn't get a chance. I was out in South Africa at the time. I couldn't organise a postal vote. And I thought, well, I'll just have to let it run with everybody else's vote. Yeah. Maybe that's a bit irresponsible. I don't know. But it means that I'm clean.
Well,
I don't have to say, I put up my hand for this, I put up my hand for that. And there is a sense in which once you put up your hand, what do you do then? Because there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. Yeah. Now, in a democracy, you lose gracefully. And you might say, okay, I'm still stuck with that idea, that's where I want to go, but I'm going to fight it in democracy later. And I might not have to fight it. And this, it kind of, you can roll it back and say, well, even this conflict between tribes can come down to the individuals. And how do you kind of get to the bottom of a disagreement with people? Two individuals. And it comes down to this idea of speaking the truth in love and kind of getting it out there, bringing people along who will support your side. But then there's a learning process. And I was doing some work in one company, I've only briefly, and you're ending up in court and you're defending your company. And this process of resolving things is part of the democratic system where you end up defending your side in court, and one or other of you, or both, end up learning things. And at the moment, this problem in the ANC control of the courts, which is not total. I think there might be some good news this week. I don't know. But if they don't have control and if they haven't captured this independent body within the democracy, then there's a possibility of somebody learning something. But and listen, so I see a great deal of hope, possibility, but it's on a thread.
It is on a thread. And let me make a point about that, Keith. Thanks for bringing that up. So the judiciary in Zimbabwe was independent as well. It was legitimate, full of black and white justices who adhered to the Constitution of the rule of law. And they were simply people showing up at the doorsteps with dead animals in their hand, and they got the message. And a few of them were also killed, traffic accidents and such. So the independence of the judiciary disappeared within a matter of weeks and months in Zimbabwe because the judiciary told the ZANU-PF government that it was not enforcing the rule of law, it was violating the rule of law, and they were eliminated. And the courts were stuffed full of hacks who don't know jurisprudence from their fourth point of contact. So we have to be careful about that. Courts can be co-opted very quickly. Is that Marabani with a smoke? Oh my gosh, he either held out and had him a long time or he's dealing in illegal cigarettes. We won't discuss that. But
I'm in the Netherlands.
Okay, that's right. You're in the Netherlands.
I ran away to do my master's here because
no wonder you're talking to Dutch people. I was wondering where you find all these Dutch people. They haven't been to Cape since 1652.
No. I left to do my master's here because I was losing my mind trying to keep it going at UCT, and I had a lecturer who, I mean, his course include the first he actually oversaw the thesis that I mentioned calling for genocide, and passed it. And the first paper that he gave us to read, official reading, was something by a woman called Susan Buck-Morse, where she argued that the ideal model for revolution is Haiti. And he was clearly insinuating that this ought to be applied to South Africa. It's literally the world's only successful genocide.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can understand why I left.
Now, are you talking about Haiti being the one successful genocide?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, no, the French were completely obliterated in Haiti. And we're not talking about 2,000 Frenchmen. We're talking about a lot of Frenchmen. And not only that, but France tried repeatedly to go back and reconquer it and saw entire armies wiped out in Haiti. Very successful genocide, the most brutal, horrific of things that happen. And if people wonder why people who are minorities get concerned about governments in power, well, you need to look only at Haiti and what happened in Haiti. Christian is trolling again. Christian says, why is all the hate and fear on the right, Chris? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any hate in my heart. And I'm on the right, so I don't know where you're coming from, Christian.
I resent that enormously. I think a lot of people think that because someone who is not on with the sort of progressive vibe spots something that they think is dangerous, that they're out there to hate people. And I think this is absolutely ridiculous. I don't want to see my country this way. Since my very youth, I've idealized people like Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu. My whole dream until it got shattered was to just be no more than a labor lawyer. I thought just doing my little part in what was an established system of good progress would be enough. I don't know. I mean, like these little video essays that I've been putting out, I mean, I find them absolutely harrowing to put together because I have to go through footage watching my countrymen get torturing and murdering each other, and it's bloody awful. And I think, for people to say that somehow because we fear the hatred, racism, and violent ideation of others, that is what we have in our hearts, I think that's perverse.
No, I agree. So I'm digging the sweater view there. We see that Marabani's walking around in his sweater, so that's kind of cool. But
sorry, I have to smoke out the window.
No, just giving you a hard time here. So let me do a little bit of housekeeping here too. Christian, you're still trolling. You're calling hypocrisy. I think I'm going to stop answering that because you're having too much of a go there. So Stevie B says, Chris, do you think the U.S. forces in Botswana will come to our aid? That's going to be hard, Stevie. There's no U.S. forces in Botswana. Why do people believe that? I used to live there. The U.S. forces in Botswana were under my control, and it involved all of 6 people in uniform. So I'm not sure what U.S. forces people are talking about. There are no U.S. forces in Botswana. There's no U.S. base in Botswana. There never has been a U.S. base in Botswana. And even if there were, they would not invade South Africa over a civil conflict. So that's not going to happen on either level. Hank asked a question, are there any countries besides South Africa that make laws to keep minorities down? Absolutely. It's historical. It's contemporary. For instance, in Liberia, you are banned from owning land unless you are a black African according to the Constitution. That has been their Constitution all along. That's discriminatory. We could go on and on and on about that. Let me see. And there was something else here I want to get. Yep. Oh, yeah. Skulk says hit the like button. Yeah, please hit the like button, folks. We one more like to get to 100. That's pretty cool. And we've just peaked out at the highest number of people watching the stream. Apparently, people are really digging Marabani's sweater, so don't run off on us, Marabani. And Erica, why don't you get back here in the conversation there? You've been very patient and quiet. Anything to comment on Marabani, Keith, or I have said?
It's interesting what Marabana is saying and hearing things from his perspective, because I think there's a lot of thought that's been put into that, but I have to look back at my history and at the history, like the World Wars. Now, my parents were in the World Wars, and we're losing that history as they're dying, as these old people are dying away. But we're not learning. We're not learning from history. These new things are being introduced, and then it causes conflict, and people die. Why do we have to have this conflict? Why can't we just negotiate through things and try and live peacefully with each other?
Well,
it's a good question, but it's a multifaceted answer. Some of the answer is racism and bigotry. That's part of it. Another part of it is a desire for power over all else. And there's other reasons for it. Sounds like Marabani wants to add some comments there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, the real tragedy of this is that you do not actually need a large number of people to derail any organization, any community at all. You only need a very small number. And this is something that Nassim Taleb picks up on for like more anodyne topics like food regulation and so on. And there's a good example in South Africa. I actually believe he uses this example, although I can't remember. Which is halal food. So now in South Africa, you've got a very small number of people who are Muslim, but because their dietary requirements are very, very serious, it's actually cheaper for supply chains to it's cheaper for supply chains to provide everything as halal food than it is for them to provide two different streams. And so if you go to a supermarket in Cape Town, particularly like Spar or Pick n Pay, you pick up any piece of meat, it's halal. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have a particular issue with that. But if you look at it in the sort of if you look at it from a more political lens, and you look at something like the woke politics, there are a very, very small number of people, or they're a lot bigger now, and they managed to have an outsized influence on all of the major institutions in the country, because they take leverage positions. They find someone who's responsible for making a decision, and they say, they force them to make a public statement for or against something on the basis of their moral system. And they say, well, are you for or against, are you for discrimination against minorities? No. Okay, then why are you allowing this person to use your products? And so you're starting to see this having reached as high as MasterCard. And one of the problems with that is a lot of the Western world is headed for what they call the cashless society. And you're already starting to see MasterCard refuse, through all payment systems, access to banking for individuals who are politically dissident. Now, usually they're quite unsavory people, like the extremely misogynist Dick Masterson. But I think it's worth paying attention to, because this is not simply being excluded from polite society, not being allowed to speak. This is on the level of being denied the ability to feed yourself. And it didn't require a large number of people. It required very targeted activism by a very tiny number of people. And so when we were talking about why do people hate, why do all of that, because you only need a tiny number of people to pressure the government into taking certain policies. And you can look at the EFF, tiny number of representation in parliament, but they managed to call the ANC out on their failure to meet their promises in the Freedom Charter and say, look, we want you to commit to this, this, and this. And immediately Zuma jumps to the tune. And this is a man who had no interest in any kind of deep reform policies his whole presidency. But the second that the EFF start pressuring him, he starts going, okay, well, we actually do need radical economic transformation. And for Cyril Ramaphosa, who saw a large chunk of the electorate switch over to the EFF during his presidency, he took it all the more seriously. And so now you get serious white paper documents on confiscation of land. So I think what we're neglecting, and I think this is the balance one has to strike, is to say that just because society is going bad doesn't mean you judge everyone for it. Because my sympathy is actually with a lot of ordinary people, because I think the people who are keeping their heads down, that's normal human behavior. I mean, you've got families to feed, you've got yourself to feed. The repercussions of whistleblowing for ANC corruption at the municipal level is death.
Yeah.
And so when people talk about, why aren't people standing up? Because it's really dangerous. It's extremely frightening. And I don't think people should be blamed for I don't think everyone should be blamed for what's going on. There are people who are responsible, and there are people who are just trying to live their lives and get by. And, everyone's got something to lose.
And there are people who tolerate this nonsense. Is my mic on? Yeah, my mic's on. There are people who tolerate this nonsense and allow it to happen, and that's part of the problem in the political sphere. So you talk about, let me phrase it this way, the co-opting of politicians for issues. But it goes beyond that. It's the corporate world, too, the co-opting of business.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, halal meat, and almost nobody eats halal meat, yet that's everything in Pick and Pay. And so along those lines, here in the United States, let me ask each of you. You've probably heard me say this before because you guys are loyal watchers, but let me see if I get a wild answer here. And not trying to embarrass anybody, but what do you think the percentage of America's population that is considered black? Start with Keith.
I think it's something like 15, isn't it? I think, if I remember your comment.
See, you were listening. Erica, what do you think it is?
I would have said 8%. I don't know.
8%. Okay, that's a good guess. Marabani?
Well, I happen to know that it's 13%
Okay,
because I read this stuff. So, but I read a funny comment on Twitter, because I try and keep a foot in all of the different sort of political discussion circles, whether they're far left, far right, and what have you. And one of these sort of deep reactionary types mentioned that when he was in high school, and which I assume would have been only a few years ago, that when the teacher asked this question, everyone in the class, nobody knew how many white people or Hispanic people or whatever, but they knew how many black people there were. And amongst right-wing circles, the ratio of homicides that are committed by by black people in the United States is an extremely well-shared statistic. So I think I think cognizance of these facts tends to become a bit of a political shibboleth. So I think that's something people ought to be careful of. But
can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
You were asking how many percentage in America are blacks.
Yeah.
How far back do we have to go before your relatives are related to my relatives, regardless of who we are on the world? Black, white, Chinese, African, Arab. How far do you have to go back before your parents had to be related to my parents? This is to do with if you...
Considering we all have West European ancestry, that goes back to Charlemagne. But if you want a universal one for all of humanity, you go back 250,000 years, because the split between the Querson genetic populations and everyone else is about 250,000 years ago.
Well, if that date is actually correct, you might have hit the nail on the head. But if you look at your parents, and then they've got parents, they've got parents, they've got parents, and it's a logarithmic scale, a bit like the grain of rice on one square of a chessboard, and before you get to the end of the chessboard, you've got all the rice in the world plus some you can't even find. Yeah. And it's about 1,000 years. About 1,000 years. If you go back, Ramaphosa's relatives are your relatives, because you can't make the sums work otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that's not how that's not how genetic information is passed on. If you'll excuse me being a nitpicker, but the thing is that we are all actually a fair bit inbred, and most men do not actually pass on the genetic information. So there's a very heavy skew to women passing on genetic information more than men.
Yeah, the mitochondria is traceable within the women, so you can actually tell where those people came from, and you can see by the changes in the different generations the time scale of that process. So I can't give you all the details. I'm not a genetic scientist, but we often are told different facts about what has happened in the past and how long it took and all this kind of stuff. But actually, it might not be quite how people realize.
Well, listen, I've done a lot of research on genetics for a long time, ever since Gregor Mendel and his peas fascinated me as a young man in high school. And it's really been a fascinating field to follow. And it's really supplemented archaeology in a lot of ways, because we have a lot better source of information to supplement a lot of the research. The thing about America that's always been nice until now is that the sins of the father do not visit the sins of the son or daughter. And so you can reinvent yourself, even if you're a failure in society. But this effort to paint people, I thought was really interesting. I make a joke about it. It was funny to see the other day, Tito Mboweni suddenly moved the narrative from 1652 and Jan van Riebeeck to 1920 and King George. So all that time is forgotten now. It's only King George's fault. So we only have to go back to 1920 to blame white folks for South Africa's ills. But no, it's the sins of the father. That's kind of there's a little bit of housekeeping. Let me do some housekeeping here real quick, folks. Okay, so... where was that? Yeah. Christian's still trolling. He asked me how many people got infected today in my country. I don't know, Christian. It's midday, and we won't get the tally until tomorrow. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, this thing is something that irritates me. Is even The Economist does this stupid thing of displaying total number instead of proportion of the population, and America's not actually that bad. The worst country up until recently was actually Belgium, and they did the most stringent measures of lockdown of any country, aside from China, of course. So, I mean, there isn't really any sort of strong correlation between the policies undertaken and the infections had. And a lot of people like to point to Sweden, but I mean, Sweden's sort of neither here nor there. And the one big factor that seems to have done the worst damage is that in many places, particularly in the blue states in the US, is that people sent the corona infected into old age homes to be cared for.
Yeah.
Which is precisely the most stupid thing that you could possibly do. But Sweden and the UK did them as well. So, I mean,
40% of the deaths in the state of Pennsylvania were in care homes, old age care homes in the Philadelphia area. The vast majority. Yesterday, the governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf, decreed that all Pennsylvanians must wear a mask at all times outside their homes. You know what he can do? He can shove it up his rectum. He can shove it up his rectum until he is uncomfortable. I'm not, he can go to hell. First off, he can't make me wear a mask. He can't, because I have a condition that I can make an argument. So I'll defiantly walk around without one. Stupidity in the widest, I'm 100 feet from somebody. Bullshit has a range that's less than that. And certainly this has a range less than that. Utter nonsense. This hysterical reaction to things, shutting down counties in which they've had cases of 20 or 30, that not now, this is 3 months ago when we shut down, 20 or 30 cases of COVID-19 out of 500,000 residents and 0 deaths. Yet their entire economy is paralyzed and shut down. You make a good point there, Marabani. The United States has 330 million documented legal Americans who are here. And guests who are here on a legitimate green card and visa, 330 million, and we have 125,000 people who've died from a disease. This year, so far, COVID-19, and a lot of deaths are falsely attributed to this, by the way. We know this from data around the world, especially in the United States, where even the authorities in New York, one night to the next, the number of deaths went from 6,300 to 10,400, and they had to admit that, we started taking suspected COVID deaths. We never tested these people, but we thought they died because they had respiratory problems. So let's take that, but let's assume the figure of 500,000 is correct. Let's pretend that that's correct, okay? That means that after 8 months of this nonsense, which started in November in China, 8 months of this globally, we have less deaths from COVID-19 than we got from malaria in 2019. 620,000 people died from malaria around the world, most of them in Africa, in 2019. 1.5 million people died from tuberculosis. It's just as infectious as this, and we didn't shut the world down. And the only people that wear masks for tuberculosis are those with active TB, so they don't get you sick. Not so you can't get it. This hysteria is off the charts, and I'm getting derailed from the land issue here because I love to talk about my favorite pet project right now, the greatest political hoax of the 21st century. Anyway, so yeah, back to, let me answer. There's a couple more things I want to get here really quick and mention. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa on the Indaba Africa channel, or I always get that backwards, Indaba Africa on the Chris Wyatt Africa channel, whichever it is. But thanks for tuning in. The topic today has been land and poverty in South Africa. We touched a lot on land and also a bit on poverty, but not all the solutions. And we've got some recommendations and steps, which I'll bring in here shortly. Had a collection of guests in here. Nigel's been in the conversation. Brett's been in. And we've also now got Marhobani and Erica, and Keith is still with us. Keith has been here since the outset. So thank them for being in the conversation. And we're over 2 hours right now. I'm going to go a bit longer because people seem to be engaging and interested. But let me cover some of the housekeeping comments. So Justin Case asked this question: is there not a base at Tebe Patswa? Yes, Justin Case, there is an air base that belongs to the Botswana Air Arm, which is part of the Botswana Defense Force. That base has been there for 30 years. It's a Botswana base. I've been to it hundreds of times. It's not a U.S. base. There's no U.S. personnel there. Do you ever see U.S. military personnel in uniform at Tebe Patswa? Of course you do. We do exercises and mill-to-mill familiarization events with the Botswana Defense Force. You'll find U.S. troops on occasion in Northwest Province. You'll find them out in the Northern Cape at the training center. You will find sometimes U.S. forces in Namibia. Well, that's less likely, but it does happen. But you will find U.S. forces. But we're not talking about permanently stationed troops. They're not there. Not there. Christian says, Chris has gone mad. If I go out in public, wear a mask. Okay, yeah, anyway. Back to that. So there is a base at Tebe Patswa, but it belongs to the government of Botswana, and every single aircraft and piece of equipment and personnel on that base that's stationed there belongs to the government of Botswana, not to anyone else. Yes, I just want to do that housekeeping very quickly. Let me look at the chat really quickly. Christoph says, we currently have to build up towards lockdown level 5 in South Africa. The government does not need to implement it. The regulations are causing companies and citizens to do it themselves. Yeah, well, it's like BE. You have companies that don't try to get tenders with the government, so they don't have to be BE certified to be in business. yet they can't get subcontracts because the companies that do business with the government are terrified that they're going to be, penalized for hiring companies that work for them that don't have BE. And so you get the government gets civil society to do its bidding. And that's what's happening here with COVID-19 and going around the world. Right. Okay. Keith, been a while since we had in conversation. Anything you want to add? Oh, your mic is silent, Keith.
Got a rumble in the background. So
Yeah.
Tonya Timms was just mentioned here, this getting out of the country because of the idiocy going on. And is there a way forward to get more communication going? I've heard, I think it's the social philosopher, isn't it, in the UK or in America, who comes on and gets groups together to get them to actually bring to the surface the real issues that they're contending with in their own mind. Because what's been happening over the years is this infiltration of people's thinking. And so the people who are getting carried along by different things in South Africa at the moment may not want the upshot of where we're going, but they are just going to get carried along. The same has happened in Rwanda, the same has happened all over the world in different situations where people are created into a mob violence attitude. So is there a way of getting that and putting the brakes on the potential for mob violence where communication comes out? I don't know, because the media is really controlled quite a lot in South Africa, so it's probably not going to happen on the television channels.
Okay. Erica or Marbani, you guys want to answer his question? Do you have an answer for him?
Sorry, I got caught up reading.
I've got a comment. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Erica.
The one thing that I realized when I was very young, thinking back to the Congo experience and all that, I realized that one of our biggest problems as humans are we are ruled by our fear. And that is what I'm seeing happening over and over and over again, that the government controls us through fear. They make us afraid of each other. They made us scared of the future. Take our food away, control the population. This is how we are being ruled. So if we can overcome our fear, then we will stop being slaves to fear, and we'll be able to stand firm in who we are.
Mm. No, that's a reasonable comment. I think it is really important for people to realize that. Wow, now I don't hear the echo. Finally, somebody's got it off. It's really important for people to realize that you need to inform yourself, because listen, the problem I have with governments around the world, particularly in South Africa and my government here in the United States, when it comes to, like, for instance, what's going on now politically, but also the COVID-19 thing, is that they just don't know. And rather than be humble and be honest with us, they pretend as if they are the experts, and we dare not ask a question, not even challenge authority, but just ask a question, and you get demonized. So let's just run through a list of some of the things, and we'll use COVID-19 as an example of how governments have got it wrong, yet they're telling us. First off, the Chinese Communist Party and the World Health Organization under Dr. Tedros told us in mid-January that the COVID-19 virus could not be transmitted human to human, despite massive evidence provided by Chinese physicians themselves in the city of Wuhan, who got the word out on social media before they disappeared. So, okay, so if it can't be transmitted human to human, it must be airborne, and we're all just getting it from rain and sunshine. Okay, so they were wrong about that. Then they were also told us here in the United States not to buy masks, because masks do not work. They will not protect you. Now, I've been consistent. I told people that you shouldn't rush out and buy masks in January and February, because I know that the mask is intended to prevent someone who's providing assistance to someone else from infecting them with something they have. That's why in surgery, physicians wear masks so they don't spread any germs onto a patient in a clean sector. That's why you do it, not to protect the physician, but to protect the patient. So those masks were necessary for first responders, emergency medical technicians, law enforcement, and for people working in medical facilities to keep them from spreading whatever they might have, influenza, sniffles or something like that. So when people ask about masks, I said, well, you shouldn't rush out and buy them, because they're needed by those folks primarily. But then in the meantime, here in the United States, we shipped tons and tons of personal protective equipment and masks to China in January, before the first case turned up here in the U.S. And so we found ourselves almost out of this stuff. So don't buy masks is what the government told us because they're ineffective. Now, my governor says I'll be arrested if I don't wear a mask when I walk outside my door. Get your story straight. We were told that you can't get it from or give it to your pets. Now we're told that don't let your pets socialize because they can transmit the disease. We were told that the fatality rate for COVID-19 was 3.4%. That is ridiculous. Now, that's a scary figure. That's a high mortality rate for an infectious disease. Now, it's not on the level of Ebola between 40 and 90%, depending on the variant and the circumstances, but 3.4% is dangerous. But it turns out that the mortality rate, even with the fictitious numbers that are being presented to us today that are cooked up because of suspected COVID cases, is 0.1 to 0.2% of those who actually infected with the virus actually succumb to it. And then instead of protecting the vulnerable, we just protect everybody by shutting down the world's economy and breaking the social fabric of life. This is just insane. And my point with this is that instead of humility, government keeps telling us that we're wrong, they're right, every time they get it wrong. How about they just be honest and say, we're doing the best we can. We don't have all the answers, and this is our best advice at this time. You should follow this advice. But no, we are just demons, and in this country, you know, just a bunch of old white people toting guns, showing up at rallies, and you're dangerous. But it's okay to burn our cities. Go ahead, Mahabani.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're doing the best they can. I think what they're doing is they're following established trends. Because, I mean, look, so, I mean, I don't know how many of you've read Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent or watched the documentary, if you're too lazy to read the book.
Sorry.
But it's, look, one of the key elements of his sort of idea, his theory of how media ecosystems function is that there are a few small but very prestigious organizations that set the agenda. And the big one in the West is the New York Times, for example. So what the New York Times prints, every other paper will print. They decide what counts as news, etc. But this also happens in the policymaking sphere. It's not just media. So if you want to understand this, the people who've been setting the agenda for the past 30 years, if not longer, if you restrict the envelope, is the United Nations. Now, they were the first. They have official bodies that decide what body of thought they're going to apply to certain problems, whether it's development or sociology or whatever. And so they have this thing called the Social Science Research Council. And they decided that critical theory was the official basis for analysis way back at the end of the 80s, early 90s. And so that filtered on down because that becomes then the most prestigious body of thought. It could have died with the rest of socialist ideas when the Soviet Union did, but it didn't. It transferred to the UN. And so every major prestigious university in the West goes, oh, well, you know, if we want to keep up with the trends, we're going to have to do what the UN does. Now, with disease control, they had a similar protocol. For about a decade or so, they've been worrying about the fallout from, I actually went to class with this guy's nephew, Andrew Wakefield, and his anti-vax studies, you know, because I did high school in Bedfordshire. So the big thing behind this has become a very big concern to a lot of policymakers. How do we deal with people who are ignorant about vaccinations and so on? And the other thing that kept coming up is large risk situations. And after the economic crash, Nassim Taleb's ideas became gangbusters. Everyone left and right thinks, you know, this is the guy to watch out for. So prepare for extremely rare events. And while there are a few people who've been sort of crowing about, haha, I predicted there would be a mass global infection pandemic thingy. The UN has been talking about it for more than a decade, at least, in official releases. And so a lot of the responses that we've been having, where you attempt to track everyone, like the Northeast Asians did, or you try to get everyone to conform to a universal behavioral code. These things have been central features of it. And there's a film called Contagion, the script for which was written by a senior UN policy advisor. Mm-hmm. And if you look at what's being carried out across the world nowadays, it's the plot of Contagion. It really is. And I mean, people think this is conspiracy, but all it is institutional culture.
Yeah.
And like a lot of these things that seem to be very, very suddenly consensus across the Western world. What you really, really want to see it as is that there is an institutional community amongst academics and think tanks and policymakers and civil servants and the global media, and they share Twitter circles, WhatsApp groups, conferences, so on. And the ideas that trend amongst them become the sort of things that everyone goes, okay, well, this is definitely the smart idea because it's the new emerging trend. And the big emerging trend that you want to look out for next is the one I call global Mugabenomics. And you can look at people like, and I'm not fucking exaggerating, you can look at people like Mark Blythe and the extremely popular and rhetorically gifted Rutger Bregman, who is a Dutchman who I mean, he's been on every major news channel. He invited to Davos. He's in the jet set, and these are people who are arguing for simultaneously open borders, deficit spending, and infinite printing of money to cover universal basic income and so on. And the thing behind this is, even once you start arguing against the sort of empirical object level end of these things, which we all know is shit, what you get to underneath it is that they've made a very comprehensive moral argument. And if you look at, I don't know if I've got it floating around here, but you should definitely, yes, I do actually. So this book, it's Austerity by Mark Blythe. Now, he's an extremely intelligent man. He's an economics professor at Harvard. And you really want to pay attention to him because his arguments are absolutely watertight from a layman's perspective. You look at him and you go, wow, this man's really got it clocked in. It's socialism for the elites and it's capitalism for everyone else. We pay the cost for blah, blah, blah. And he's right at that far. But what he's done is he says that austerity is anytime you reduce, you cut regulation and you cut government spending. And he said that is based on the philosophies of economic liberalism, and it's a false moralism and is always morally wrong. Now, if you can see the genius in that, what he's done is he's created a moral ratchet where the only reforms that are morally allowed, if you follow those ideas, are those that increase the scope of the state, increase spending, increase money printing, and increase economic interventions. And he's not alone in this. There's a large body. Thomas Piketty, for example. These people are absolute giants in the modern intellectual sphere amongst the trendy people who have all the influence. And there's a lot of confluence of interests here because large multinational corporations benefit when you make it expensive to run businesses because all of their smaller competitors get priced out of the market. At the same time, you're offering policymakers and civil servants carte blanche to expand their power and control and prestige projects. So all of these things that we're seeing, where we're seeing the woke left aligning with the corporations and the state, is that they all share interests in the same policies, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, if you look at Great Britain, which I think is an interesting example, there was research done recently where every single party in the parliament is to the left of the average voter.
Yeah.
On every issue.
In South Africa too.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's absolutely true. That's, people seem to think that the DA. So one of the reasons I took issue with the Democratic Alliance is that they completely lost the plot because they went from a left-leaning party to a junior ANC under Musi Maimane, and very disturbing, very disturbing. So let me, there's a little bit of housekeeping here, guys. Let me do this very quickly. So Harry Mako has said, Colonel, you're not a scientist or a medical doctor. Why are you trying to give medical advice? Well, to that, I say, first off, number one, I didn't give any medical advice. Did you guys hear me give medical advice? I simply stated what I believe to be factually true. I didn't tell people to wear a mask, to inject their veins with, battery acid, or to dance 3 times to the sun and pray to a god that you're going to cure yourself. I simply stated things that I said the government has been wrong about, and I would appreciate some humility. And then I also mentioned Pennsylvania and my governor requiring masks, and I told him to go stuff it up his rectum. That's not medical advice. That's just my view on the governor of Pennsylvania. So let's make a clear distinction here, Harry. I'm not picking on Harry, but I didn't offer medical advice. And if you're listening to medical advice from someone other than a medical professional, anyone that's out there, well, then that's on you. That's a mistake. You shouldn't listen to people who are giving you medical advice that aren't medical practitioners. Having said that, I am an intelligence analyst, and I've spent the last 20 years in Africa, much of that time running medical programs, HIV programs, tuberculosis programs, malaria programs, Ebola research programs. So I'm not exactly just off the turnip truck and know nothing about these topics. So as an analyst and had some experience at running these programs, funding these programs, designing these programs, and evaluating these programs, I probably have more to say that is bearing on the issue than the average bear out there. Anyway, so yeah, that's why I'm talking about it. And then Anthony Jenkins says, is it true that Obama spoke about COVID virus a few years back? I'm not aware of that. He talked a lot about viruses. Of course, remember we had the Ebola hysteria in the United States when it hit West Africa, and we act like it was just going to descend on us from the sky, from people who in the lay community, including politicians like Obama, who don't understand how Ebola works, how it propagates, and what dangers there were. I remember, and they don't even understand economics. I remember when my government responded to Ebola, I was in Ethiopia, and they said, we're banning flights from Africa. I'm like, the only flights from Africa come from Ethiopia, Egypt, and South Africa. There's no Ebola there. So why are you banning flights from South Africa and from Egypt and Ethiopia? That's insane. It makes no sense. There's no flights from West Africa to the U.S. They all go through Europe. So if you want to stop Ebola from coming in America, stop flights from Europe. There you go. But anyway, that just shows you how stupid. And the Fonz said that after the attack in Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto said, I fear we may have awoken a sleeping giant. And Fonz is saying, in the U.S. today, I think the leftists are also waking a sleeping giant, the conservative and central liberals. I don't know if that's true, but I certainly hope it is waking people up and opening their eyes to the wool being pulled over their eyes by corporate America, by our government, by political commentators, and by the media. I hope that's the case. All right, Erica, you got anything to add? We're coming up on almost 2.5 hours here. It's wow.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, but nothing really to add to this. Yeah. Except that we need to realize, that the choices we make are our choices, in life. And I want to go back to this whole thing of fear, because as you know, I'm a hypnotherapist as well. And I've noticed that a lot of our illnesses are based through fear, headaches, things like that. But it's not just that, it's if we're going to live a life, our lives fully, we need to do it without fear. And just be ourselves, reach across the color barrier and just go for it. I know it sounds stupid, but it works for me.
No, it doesn't sound
not,
stupid.
It's not stupid at all.
Not in the least
bit. It's not stupid at all.
It absolutely drives me nuts. Hang on, Mahabani. It drives me nuts how people try to create race. It's an artificial human creation. Our DNA is nearly identical. The differences between us are infinitesimal. That's why it takes a supercomputer to sit down to break the DNA up and to identify each person's individual genome, because there's so little difference between us. It's so frustrating to see people use an artificial thing like appearance or gender or someone's beliefs to attack them and divide them. And that's where happening around the world. It's happening in the U.S., it's happening in South Africa, and most people that I've ever met, whether it's in Africa or the United States, wherever I've lived. I lived in a housing project. Almost everybody was black. I got attacked, a switchblade put to my throat. Does that make black people evil? No. That made that guy a jerk. It didn't make his brother, who was my best friend, evil. And so people use this. This is what was used in the Balkans. They used religion to divide people on an artificial basis and ethnicity, to divide people. In Sarajevo, in the decades leading up to the end of Yugoslavia, when it collapsed in 1992, in the decades leading up to that, the 3 previous decades, 66% of all marriages in the city of Sarajevo that were conducted in the city of Sarajevo were inter-ethnic, inter-religious. So there were Christian Orthodox marrying Catholics who were Croatians, marrying Serbs who were Bosniaks, who were Muslims. They all married each other. They all got along just fine. And then suddenly, because Slobodan Milosevic opened his big mouth on the Kosovo Plogi in 1987, stirring racial hatred and ethnic hatred, stirring up memories of the Battle of the Kosovo Plogi in 1389, when 30,000 Serbs were wiped out by the Ottoman Turks, used that as a basis to springboard himself to election as the president of the Republic of Serbia inside Yugoslavia, and it all started falling apart from there. And that's, people use these things to divide us. Shut these idiots out, shut them out, and let's all just work together, those who want to work together. Go ahead, Marabani. Thanks for being patient.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And there's a fellow in the chat called Variable Vision who has addressed me, and I just want to correct him briefly. I didn't say that nothing can be done. I just outlined something that was very intimidating. I think the problem is that a lot of people, how should I put this? A lot of people get themselves comfortable thinking, people will wake up, but you know, waking up it doesn't really help you. You have to get out the door and knock on other people's doors and get real face-to-face interaction and organization. That's literally the only way you can get actually anything political done. And if you want to look at someone in South Africa who's taking this seriously, I think the fellow Sihle Ngobesi, Big Daddy Liberty, he's doing the real deal. He's going door to door, telling people, no, this is how it is. This is what I see. This is how to solve the problems. And someone like that's what we really need. People who really have a common vision that's not tainted by racial consciousness, and who want to build a serious South Africa where people's first port of call is not the state, but their family, their friends, and their community, and voluntary associations. So I think that's where people really need to go. And as much as you can, talk to people in real life if you can. And because this online stuff, it's great for connecting people who have intellectual ideas in common, and great for discussing ideas and introducing people to new ways of thinking. But eventually you have to come out of the mental realm and engage in the flesh. So I think that's where it goes. And I think the other thing is to have a bit of faith. I think the thing is that it's very, very easy, and I can tell you from personal experience, it's very easy when you're looking at this stuff to get scared and go, oh, shit, let me retreat into my bunker and think about the coming war. And yeah, part of your brain has to sort of, have that on file in case the worst comes to the worst. But I think that's the last possible port of call. The first thing that you need to be doing is thinking, well, how can I build friendships and allegiances that don't rely on raw. Well, I'm not suggesting rioting Henk Klopper. That's ridiculous. No, rioting is stupid, and it hurts people who have nothing to do with the issue. What you do is you go and you organize people, and most of the things that have effect are very peaceable. They usually involve phone calls, petitions, public interviews, peaceful protests. Those things have enormous effect, like you wouldn't believe. That is where most of the change for the past several generations has come from. People who think that you have to resort to violence, it's foolish. You resort to violence when there's no other option. This is the lesson Mandela gave at the Rivonia trial. He said,
"There's no option left. No option left."
Exactly. By any means necessary, not by any means available.
Right, there you go. That's a great point. That's exactly right. That's what he said at the Rivonia trial. And the only reason that MK was formed is because, in their view, the peaceable, lawful actions were not having effect, and they exhausted all other options. And to be fair, the African National Congress, in its original African Native Congress, started back in 1912, and it wasn't until the early 1960s that they resorted to armed resistance. Rather ineffectually, but they did resort to it. Let me make a comment here very quickly. So Harry is saying, I still repeat, don't tell people not to wear a mask. Some of us know people who died of this virus. We take this virus seriously. All right, Harry, for your edification, I didn't tell anyone not to wear a mask. I said I will not be wearing a mask because I have a condition and I can tell my governor to stuff it. That's what I said. That's a political opinion. That's not advice for anyone to not wear a mask. Feel free to wear a mask. Feel free to put on a Darth Vader helmet or wear a Harley Davidson motorcycle helmet if it gives you comfort, if it works for you, if you find efficacy in it. I did not tell anyone that. So I still repeat that I never gave that advice. Stop responding emotionally to a rational comment. Okay? I did not tell people not to do that. And some of us take this virus. Yeah, well, I take it seriously too. But I don't take the political hysteria and the hoax seriously. I take it seriously. You've heard me say endlessly that this is a highly contagious virus. We know that. And it has a devastating effect on people who have underlying conditions in particular, people with compromised immune systems. Never denied it. Said that from the outset. And I've been consistently correct in that. Unlike our governments, which have told us varying stories about that. That is a fact. So please don't turn this into something it's not. That's not what this is about. We discuss cogent things here. We discuss them reasonably, and we dismiss with the hysteria. It's okay to get emotional, but I did not say that, and I'm not saying it now. And I have no intention of ever saying that, telling people how to do it. Well, we never did get around to the prudent steps. Let me run through them real quick and ask you guys' opinions before we drop off here, okay? So in my article, for those who had the time to read it and took a look at it, I said these are prudent steps. This is from 2 years ago. Now they're not all easily implemented, okay? Let's be honest, okay? But these are from an objective point. That's what Marabani is pointing out. This is an objective article. So prudent steps to a fair redress of land in South Africa. This is presupposing that people that want to talk about land are doing it objectively and they actually want to do it. And that's not even the case for any. But a complete and honest national public review and debate of all land, state, traditional trust, and private tenure, which includes identification of all land taken from owners or occupants from 1910 to 1994 and settlements since 1994. In other words, if land has been redistributed since 94, that must be part of the conversation too. You can't simply identify it as land that was stolen because someone has purchased it from someone that got it legally since 94. Use existing legal mechanisms to acquire, distribute, and monitor land. The law is in place which allows the government to achieve these ends if it's used effectively and properly. There should be a renunciation of all land claims prior to 1910. I stand by this. Anything before 1910 is just lunacy. I can claim land in Ireland from the year 627 when my ancestors lived there and it was taken by the English. Is it mine? No, that's ludicrous. Removal of racial injections into the arguments. Stop with the racist stuff. Whites are not the only people in South Africa who took land via conquest or displacement. Black Africans did it as well as mixed race colors. The Greekwood took land from others. I'm not criticizing or commenting on it. The Zulu displaced millions of people with the Mfakane and assimilated or wiped out entire tribes. The Bantus displaced the Khoisan San. Large segments of land prior to 1910 where whites settled were open and unoccupied as they moved northwards as a result of the Mfakane in particular. Race is a legitimate topic post-1913 Native Lands Act and later apartheid policies and should be part of the public debate. So for those who will claim that I say that race doesn't play a role apartheid, no, that's not true. Read my article. In fact, I say it is a legitimate discussion topic. And okay, immediately withdraw the constitutional amendment to expropriate without compensation. It violates the current Constitution. It violates the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It violates the spirit and intent of the Constitution, and it violates all moral understanding. So it is not the right way to redress past grievances. They can be done properly. So those are the points I made. Prudent steps, complete honest land review, then use existing mechanisms, renounce all land claims prior to 1910, remove race from the interjections, and immediately withdraw the constitutional amendment. Those things right there would go a long way to addressing land issues in South Africa if people actually want to address land. If it's being used as a cudgel or a tool for other purposes, then those things aren't going to accomplish it. So there you go. Thoughts, Erica?
My final word. Well, what's happened to me, Karen, since everything, my history and all that, right now, where I stand as a white South African, although I've got a Swiss nationality, I'm not Swiss. I'm African. I was born in Africa. And yet, looking at everything that's happened to us, with me having this repeated skin color, it's actually made me kick back, and I'm standing now for the white people, because I'm told I should be ashamed of my skin color. I'm not ashamed, and during this lockdown, there was a rule that was a ruling put out that we weren't allowed to feed the white squatters and things like that. That turned me, and I started rebelling, and I started smuggling food to white squatters, because I don't think that's right, and that we should be judged by our skin color and be ostracized for that. And now I'm standing for the white people. I'm not a racist at heart, but I am a rebellious. And unfortunately, I've been put into a corner, and I will fight back. Sorry.
No, it's quite all right. Erica, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. It's been great having you in the chat, as the other folks have too. So Thanks a lot. You don't have to run off this second, but I just want to thank you for that. Okay, so very quickly before we move on to Mahabane, Renier Duplessis says, proudly Neanderthal. And in that interest of full disclosure, I have just under 2% of my DNA has been attributed to the Neanderthal folks based on DNA analysis. So I, too, am a Neanderthal descendant. So I take pride in that. A people who, for hundreds of thousands of years, survived incredibly harsh conditions in Europe and Central Asia, or not Central Asia, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus. They survived for a long time and were very adapted. Well, not so adapted. They're adapted to their environment perfectly, but when their environment changed, they were slow to adapt. And anyway, so there you go. So Marabani, thoughts, comments before we wrap up?
Okie dokie. Well,
Okie dokie.
I think pretty much everything you said is very, very sound. No racial criteria. 1910 is a cutoff because that's when the state began to exist. Very, very sound, 100%. The one thing that I would say is just to be a bit more specific, and I actually wrote about this briefly on a very, very weird, abstract philosophical blog post. But because I had this silly concept I was working with called propriopertinence, which is generally that sort of much like how when you send a letter, you can't send it to some guy, you have to send it to that guy at that address. All moral issues and all legal issues have to pertain to specific actions by specific people, right? Mm-hmm. So with regards to the land issue, if someone has a claim to the land, they need to have themselves or their ancestors directly attached to that part of the land or that land seizure. And if the people occupying the land are descendants of those who took it, then they can claim redress from them. If they are not, then they claim from the state. But it has to be specific and it has to be done through the courts. It cannot be done in a blanket fashion. And so for me, it's about directly pointing to the court system and specific claims and cases. And I think the problem we actually have had this model in South Africa. The problem is that the courts system and the land, bugger me, I can't remember the official name of the organ of state, but like the land claims, agricultural land claims bureau, I don't know what they're called. I used to walk past their building every day when I studied at UCT, but they're so backed up. They're decades backed up on claims. Yeah. And so the issue is you actually really need to wholesale replace the civil service. And it's been done before. I mean, like Singapore and Indonesia have done this, where you bring in some private company, usually from Switzerland, and you have them run the organization and train everyone in a sort of apprentice system to take over from them. And you do that, and you just make sure the system works its way out. And it'll take ages. I don't think people are ready for how long and tedious fixing South Africa after all of this mess is going to be. So no utopias can be promised to anyone. It's going to get worse before it gets better, and then it's going to take a long time to get better.
I think this is a fair statement. I appreciate the comments there. I hope that those who didn't have a chance to read the article, go to LinkedIn. It's in the description below the video. Take a look at that, read that article, and see the points that we raised here, and I raised here, and people commented on, and others raised some of the same points in this conversation about land. So there was something. Let me just see. I think if I saved a comment someone made there. No, I think I covered that. Okay, great. So, oh yeah, the land claims court. Yeah, I would say that Marabani on the land claims, the deal is that the first window was 5 years. That was supposed to be it. There were over 75,000 claims, 73,000 of which were resolved. So most of them were resolved, and the ANC did pretty good. Now, to be fair, most of that didn't involve returning land. Most of it involved a financial settlement because people opted for the financial settlement. For instance, things like District 6, you're not going to bulldoze $1 billion neighborhood and turn land over to people. It's just not practical, and it's not good for South Africa. It's not in the public interest to do that. So those folks were able to. Do you have a dog or something there, Marabani?
No. I was just thinking about District 6, and I was just saying it was shameful. That's all.
No, it was shameful. But no, what I'm saying is that that's one example of urban claims in which a financial settlement was paid to most of the claimants. And so I would say that the African National Congress in the process was reasonably effective in the first round. It didn't address a few of the serious rural claims that had to be addressed. So that was still a lingering issue. But then this whole thing got turned into a populist nonsense thing, and a further round was allowed about a decade ago. And in that round, we had an additional 144,000 claims. And that's where the decades of backed up log for cases are, in part because a lot of them are fraudulent cases. There's no merit to them. I mean, you got people filing claims for land that was taken from them in 1836. Well, that's not in consideration here. But why are they doing that? Because Julius Malema and now the African National Congress are running around saying that land was taken from you by white people and it was conquest and we should get it back. Stop. That's not when the valid land period for under consideration was. Anyway. All right, well, guys, let me see. I'll give you one last chance to say a last comment, and then I'll ask you to drop off so I can close off the stream, and I want to thank you for participating. Erica, you go first. Anything you want to add?
Well, what I do want to add is for the farmers, you know, the commercial farmers, they know their land, and they get the best out of the land, and they're feeding the nation. And to take the land away from them, land that they love, it's not right, and will have a knock-on effect on the food supply, and they need to find another solution. There's a lot of other very good land that the government owns that they need to hand over to the people, not the commercial farmers. And I suggest they leave the commercial farmers alone.
All right, excellent.
And that's my last comment. Yeah.
Well, Erica, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. You have a pleasant evening, because it's evening now for you. Really appreciate you being part of the stream and contributing to the conversation. And you're very patient waiting for me to call on you. That's very, you must have been a very good student in school. You didn't just jump out of turn. So appreciate that. All right, thanks a lot, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. All right, Marabani, final comments and thoughts.
Well, I'll say two things that can be summed up in a sentence or two each. The reason that all the service delivery and the managing of the cases dried up after the 90s is because all of the skilled civil servants had been fired. So, you know, first purge, a lot of them left in 96 and even more left in 98, even people who offered to stay on for free. So, but I think as a parting remark, I would say, don't run away unless it's just temporary, like with me, because everywhere is going to go south if we keep flying from our problems, and you just become a long wing of it becomes a long chain of flight from problems, and then you've got no vested communities who have any sort of strength to resist bad state policies. So I think at the end of the day, if you care, you do have to kind of sacrifice a bit and stay put and try and organize people and try and encourage people to have a bit of positive attitude, not optimism, but a positive attitude. Big difference.
Good point there. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So this has been a special feature on Chris White Africa, the Indaba Africa channel, about land and poverty in South Africa. I've had a call-in guest here, including Nigel earlier, and Keith. Had Brett Sessoms in here earlier. Eric is here. Marabani. I may have missed somebody. Anthony did a few super chats, including one 14 Rand for mentioning psychological operations. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate that. Let's see. So Christian Paradogo says, everyone seems to have forgotten the real threat to humanity, climate change. No, I don't think we've forgotten it. The hot air coming out of politicians reminds us about the excess carbon dioxide in our environment every time they open their mouths. So we've not forgotten about climate change, but good point, Christian. And Northern Stealth says, thanks, Chris, Eric, and Marabani. Great stream. And by extension, I'm sure Northern Stealth came in late. I'm sure by extension, you met everyone else in the stream. Thank you all so much for joining. It is now after 2 p.m. here on the East Coast of the U.S. I'll debate whether I'll do a straight voltage tonight. If I do it, it'll maybe not the normal time, maybe a little bit later if anybody wants to tune in, and we can talk about these things again briefly. But thank you all so much. I'm glad I got Zoom working. This was actually kind of cool for this session. Appreciate you guys being part of it. And it's great that people around the world want to engage in this. But I will leave with the thought saying, I echo what Marabani says. It truly hurts my heart and breaks my heart to hear people want to leave their homeland and migrate elsewhere. You know, it's sad that Dinesh D'Souza didn't see opportunity in India and contribute to improving Indian society and came to America. Don't get me wrong. I am very grateful that he came to America and he became an American because the man is brilliant. He's cogent, he's clear thinking, and he doesn't tolerate nonsense. He just defeats it easily with intellectual commentary. But we're fortunate that we have him and millions of others who come to our country. But that's sad for other countries that people feel the need to leave their country or fear that they must leave their country. The already few million South Africans who are living in the United Kingdom, in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, U.S., all over the world who are not living in South Africa because they're denied opportunity or out of fear of their lives because of public safety. It's unfortunate. And I would encourage people to make a change in your own places. And what Marabani was talking about earlier is retail politics. Retail politics. If you have ideas in the public space, whether it's conservatism, it's Friedrich Hayek's views on economics, it's the Mises School of Education, whatever, or of economics, wherever your worldview is, if it's important to you, get out amongst other people. In South Africa, I will tell you that there are groups of people who others don't think about that are great potential allies. If you're talking about reason in South Africa, the Basotho people and the Tswana people have been reasonable throughout their history in many respects, and you'll find a lot of natural allies amongst those people out there. Anyway, so there you go. So retail politics is what you have to do. You have to get out, and you don't do this 90 days before an election. You do it every day, all the time. You talk about these ideas. Otherwise, you don't change things. And next thing you know, others, a small minority of radical lunatics have come along and they've changed the entire narrative, and you lose your society. The National Socialists did not steal power in Nazi Germany. They were elected to power with a plurality, but only a little over a third of the electorate. They took control of that country, and within just a couple of years, they demonized Jews, they demonized homosexuals, they demonized mixed race Germans, they demonized communists. Okay, I'm okay with that one. You can demonize communists. I don't have a problem with that one. and no slight to Marabani. He's a reformed, recovering communist, so he's welcome. But they demonized everybody who wasn't like them. They went after the aristocracy. They demonized the aristocracy. They demonized the Catholic Church. They demonized religion. And if you're not seeing a pattern here, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pattern around the world.
A problem.
It's about power and control. And that's what it's all about, and self-enrichment. All right, that's it. We're going to close out here. Thank you all so much for tuning in. God bless. Be safe wherever you are. And thanks for watching this special feature on Indaba, Africa. Ladies and gentlemen,